Equalization Board for the 4th, 5th Avenue Special Improvement District. First order of business this evening is to introduce and then swear in the board that will consist of the Assessment Equalization Board for this particular district for this series of objections. So joining with me this evening are Angie Blevins, the City Clerk, Autumn Glover, Dave Paul, and Matt Adair, who are our board members, Zach Davidson from City Council, Mark Lundeen from the Department of Development, and Hannah Reed as well. So Angie, if you want to swear in our 3 board members, we'll proceed from here.
Okay, thank you. Let's have you raise your right hand and then you can repeat after me. I, and then state your name. Can they do that all at the same time?
Matt Adair.
Do solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States,
of the United States,
the Constitution and laws of the State of Ohio,
the Constitution and laws of the State of Ohio,
and the Charter of the City of Columbus, Ohio,
and the Charter of the City of Columbus, Ohio,
and that I will honestly and impartially discharge the duties of my office as board member of the Assessment Equalization Board
of the Assessment Equalization Board
for the 4th, 5th Special Improvement District
for the 4th, 5th
Special
Improvement District
during my time in said office.
During my
time in said office.
Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angie, for that. At this point, we're going to proceed through the agenda. Essentially, I'm going to turn it over to Chair Paul, who will be able to call the cases and hear the objections and to allow the department also to present information regarding this particular assessment. Take it away, Mr. Paul.
Thank you. Now, let me mention, I actually haven't gotten the agenda that was being forwarded to us, so I'm not sure. Mark, if you forwarded those, what address are you using for me? Mark Lundeen?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
I use fpcivic.org.
Say that again.
It's pwpaul@fpcivic.org.
For some reason, I did not receive it, and you and I corresponded. I think I had a little problem getting the invitation as well to this WebEx, so something must be going wrong there. If you don't mind, I'm going to text you another address. If you could go ahead and send it to this address.
Sure.
In the meantime, we'll try to wing it. Hang on just a second. And there we go. If you would use that address, and that should reach me right away. And I apologize for any delay as we get started here. If you don't mind, also, just go ahead and let me know what our first order of business should be. We've been sworn as a board. What would you propose should be our first order of business at this point?
Mr. Paul, I believe present on behalf of the department.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I believe Mr. Lundeen was going to present on behalf of the department to give some context for the objections.
Okay, and that's a perfectly good place to start. And so, Mark, let me go ahead and again reintroduce you, as Laura has already done, as with the Department of Development, and we appreciate your bringing this information to us. And please go ahead and proceed.
Sure, I'll give you a little bit of background on our SID program, and then I'm going to turn it over specifically to a fifth, fourth SID board member to run through some information about their SID. I think Mark Wagenbrenner is on, and I believe we'll do that presentation. But the background on special improvement districts in Columbus, the first one was established in 1998 in the Short North. In 2000, with one downtown established, and this would be the eighth special improvement district. Actually renewed several of them this year and are creating two new ones, one in Franklinton and then the fifth, fourth SID. They are an additional assessment on taxes for generally commercial areas in the city, and typically support activities such as safety, cleanliness, art, landscaping, general maintenance for the area. The city, of course, is neutral on the creation of the SID should 60% of the property owners desire to create a special improvement district for their area. We then take on an administrative support role in the Department of Development. SIDs can be established for up to a 10-year period. Generally, most of our SIDs have established themselves for a 5-year period, which requires renewal. And again, the assessment process, because it is additional taxes, there's significant due diligence that goes into the petition. 6% of the linear footage of streets in the district, 60% of the owners of property need to sign the petition in order to certify it, which is done by the Franklin County Auditor. There's 4 pieces of legislation to create a SID. Effectively, it takes about a year to create a SID, and then once the SID created and the county auditor recognizes the special assessment values, it would begin the following year after it's created. So with that, I'm happy to answer board members' questions on SIDs in general, the history of SIDs in the city of Columbus. If there are no questions, I'll pull up the presentation of the specific SID.
Okay. Were there any questions from other board members for Mr. Lundeen?
No. Nope.
Okay, thank you. I did receive the agenda. Thank you, Mark, for forwarding another copy. It does appear we've been sworn in. Thank you to the clerk who has left us now, and that's fine. I understand we should publicly designate our board chair. I think we need to do that actually in session. Is that correct based on the agenda you sent? I'll just mention that we did discuss this prior to the meeting, and thank you to Matt and to Autumn who asked me to serve as chair, and I've accepted. Perhaps if Matt and Autumn would just confirm that is their preference, that's fine. Thank you. And then we also, as I understand it, need to swear in all of those who will testify, and I think this is the point in our meeting when we would do that. Is that right, as you understand it, Mark?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. And so I do see in our attendee list, we have a number of folks now. We have, in addition to the CTV stream, I see one call-in user. If perhaps that user could unmute and identify themselves. Angela, I don't know if you can help perhaps help them unmute.
Yes, I have unmuted them, but I'm not getting any.
Well, they also have to speak if they only have to testify. If they only have to speak if they want to testify, right? They might just want to listen.
That's entirely possible. I was hoping to just learn if that is one of the people who will be speaking, but you're right. So let me note, I see Betsy Pandora. I do not see Betsy as a list on our list of speakers.
I have a Betsy Pandora listed.
Okay, and I don't see her among the objectors or the board members of the SID, or am I missing something? I see Caitlin Dunn. Again, I don't see that Caitlin is on our list of folks who we were expecting to speak and therefore to be sworn.
Do you see Caitlin Dunn listed? The attendees list I'm able to see. I don't think you're able to see the list of attendees include Betsy Pandora, Caitlin
Yes.
Dunn, Kevin Nosner,
Yes.
Melissa, and Mark Wags. That's who I have listed here, sir.
Okay, and I do see that list. I guess I'm trying to identify who at this point do I need to swear in, or should I just invite anyone who wants to speak at this point to join me in being sworn in?
That makes sense. That doesn't sound like anybody wants to speak. Are any of the objectors here?
Mr. Nussner is one of the objectors. And so I'm assuming that he will want to speak and we'll want to hear from him. I don't know about the others. I also don't have any. I'm sorry. Sorry.
I was going to say, if you wanted to, because we're having some difficulty with some of the names are not identified on the list. If you wanted to, you could call and have people swear in with each individual case if you would prefer. It's up to you.
I can unmute now. So I'm Kevin. I'm one of the objectors, and I appreciate you inviting me to this meeting today.
Thank you, Mr. Nussner. And we'll talk about the pronunciation of your last name, which I probably just did very poorly.
Nosner, you got it.
Nosner. Okay, thank you. All right. Yes, let's go ahead, because I also think that a number of folks we're expecting to speak have not actually yet joined us. So perhaps we can go ahead and postpone that. Also, I don't have the prescribed language to swear them in, and I'm wondering if perhaps Laura can share that with me if she has it. That would be great. Okay. So let's go ahead and proceed then. I understand that Mark Wagenbrenner is a board member of the 4th SID, and that he would like to give us an overview presentation. And Mark, I think you're going to be assisting him with the exhibits. Is that right?
Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. No, thank you. I was wondering if we could unmute Betsy and Caitlin too. We're all together.
Okay.
Technically, Betsy and Caitlin are consultants. They're not technically hired yet by the 5th 4th SID, but they, might be able to shed some light on this presentation since they prepared it.
Both Betsy and Caitlin have been unmuted.
Thank you.
Good. So should we swear in, or we don't?
Let me.
Presenters.
Laura, I understand that you were uncomfortable doing the swearing in because of your relationship to this matter, but I also don't have the prescribed language at this point. Would you be willing to do that in this case with these particular speakers?
Yes, I can do that. I was trying to find the language on my other screen, but I can go ahead and do that now. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the information you're about to give will be the truth? So say I do.
I do.
I do. If I can be heard.
I do.
Fair enough. That wasn't so difficult after all, but thank you, Laura, for doing that. So, Mr. Wagenbrenner and our other guests, please go ahead and proceed.
Great. So Mark, we might flip to that next screen. Oops. Yep. There we go. So, do we want to do an overview for everybody on the call of the SID, or it feels like I'm preaching to folks that are fully understand the SID side? But I'm glad to either read this or this is we went over this at a previous meeting, but we might, since we I think all understand SIDs, do we want to just jump down to the second part and talk about how the Fifth Avenue and 4th Street SID were created? So,
Yes, please.
okay. So, a petition was submitted. I'm just going to read this, obviously. Was submitted to Columbus City Council by property owners along 4th and 5th Avenue area, as well as several adjacent streets. That included signatures from owners that represent at least 60% of the front footage along all public streets of the given district. Was filed in March of 2020. Notice of the receipt of the petitions was provided to the public in various published agendas of Columbus City Council in March of 2020. Columbus City Council authorized legislation for the new SID in May and June of 2020. Presentations about the idea for this new SID were made to the community through the Italian Village Society's regular meetings throughout 2020. Letters were mailed to all owners in June inviting public comments to be submitted via web form. The 54 SID is the 8th SID in Columbus.
If I could ask a quick question at this point, just because it's relevant to this slide. When property owners were notified of the opportunity to participate in the process and so forth, I'm assuming that was using the addresses of record of the county auditor. Is that right?
Betsy, I probably need your help, or Caitlin.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yay, I can be heard. I promise I swore in if that wasn't heard. Yes. The addresses where letters were mailed to the tax addresses that were on file via certified mail through the county auditor's office. In addition to that, a letter was also mailed, not via certified mail, though, to the owner address.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Should we open it up for questions at this time or keep moving on? Okay. So then, Mark, can we go to the map? So obviously the parcels in blue are the parcels that make up the 5/4 SID contribution parcels. They're contiguous. This map was, obviously we know how the process works. We got 60% of the property owners in this area, and then the map was kind of pulled and tugged on to keep all the parcels contiguous. But what we try to do is center it up along 4th Street, which is where the predominant commercial activity is happening. And I don't know if there's any questions about the shape of the map, or I'm sure we can come back to it if we need to reference it.
I think we may have some questions later on where the map will be a helpful exhibit. Okay. But if you could just explain generally, you've explained 4th Street is kind of the spine of the SID area, and then the expanse of 5th Avenue heading west from 4th Street. And can you explain perhaps why that section of 5th Avenue was included? Just generally what you were looking for in laying out the SID area. Right.
We expect more commercial activity in that strip along 5th, and so I'm doing some of this from memory, and I'll turn this over to Betsy. But at one time, the kind of origins of this I was on the Short North SID board, and going way back, we talked about, man, wouldn't it be great if we could absorb the history and experience of the Short North SID area and share it with 4th Street as it comes online, 4th and 5th, and so the idea was, hey, we could share resources with the Short North SID. And the experience and talent of the Short North Alliance, and we could obviously use help with similar services in this district. And so we went through an experimental period where this was a lot larger area at one time, and we reached out to property owners all the way over into Milo Grogan, and we spoke to and I think there's some interest in eventually joining us in a SID area. It was just a little premature. So through a process of talking to other property owners in the area, this is kind of where the map settled out. Would you say that's accurate, Betsy?
Sorry, trying to figure out how to unmute. Yeah, so the creation of a SID area is dependent upon contiguousness of parcels. And so when the owners in this particular area were having discussions about forming a SID and asked our help in leading a petition drive, the nature of which parcels were included in that area was relative to that contiguousness goal to make sure that they do touch. The 5th Avenue portion stops right where the Short North Special Improvement District's existing boundaries are. And so there clearly was a desire among some property owners in that area to see there be a connection to that point, and that's why it connects where it does down to Cortland along 5th.
Okay. And one more question, if I may. Again, it's clear that the spine and the sort of geography that was intended to be the center of the SID was the 4th Street corridor, rather. The expanse in the southern portion of the SID district, or the proposed district, I guess it is the SID district at this point, goes out to some properties to the east. Can you tell us a little bit about how those ended up being included?
A lot of those are projects associated with the Jeffrey mining site, and those are for the most part apartment projects that we volunteered to be as part of a, we see the benefits of a vital spine in terms of commercial activity. And we see the benefits of, all the good things that come along with, the Short North Alliance in terms of graffiti and, the ambassadors and the safety program. So we were, glad to participate. Those are essentially all the projects that we control that are for rent, that essentially we bear that commitment on that cost. And then when you get up on 4th Street on that spine, that's where everything pretty much had to remain contiguous. And there's some single family residents and some condos in that strip, but the hole that you see in the middle of that southern spans is for sale housing, that wasn't part of our apartment community.
Okay. All right. We may have more questions about that, but I don't want to derail your presentation. So thank you for indulging that, and please move forward then. And we'll come back to this if we need to.
Okay. Mark, can we roll to the next? So again, overview of the 54 SID plan of services. When can we start those services? As early as June of 2021. We were authorized, the SID's authorized through December of 2025. we have a host of ideas of what we can do. And as the board forms, this will get more clarified, but things that have been discussed are community planning, environmental maintenance, supplemental security, improvements in infrastructure, promotions, and member services. And I think one of the things, that got us very interested in doing a SID in this neck of the woods was for roughly every dollar spent, through SID collections in the short north, they raise over $1. And so, we're really excited about using the SID, much like what happened in the short north, is an organizing body that will allow us to work together as property owners to, brand and act cohesively to attract a lot of these. So, we think for every dollar that goes in, we hope at least $2 gets generated. And we're really blessed. Most times you start a SID, you start from nothing. And again, we get to, essentially the plan is to hire the Short North Alliance. And not only do we get the wisdom and experience there, we're all one neighborhood. We hopefully can make, by sharing administrative costs with the Short North SID, we make their dollars go further. So we really see it as an incredibly synergistic opportunity, because we all benefit, the more resources like this that can be efficiently, brought to the neighborhoods of the Short North and Italian Village, of which we're a part. We're excited to be a part of it.
Can I ask a question, Dave?
Please.
So, Mark, you mentioned that you think you could kind of really hit the ground running. I'm wondering, I just kind of a little bit more clarity about how that would be possible, because the first round of funds would have to be generated. So would you get would the SID get its first payout in June of 2021 and then form the board, or kind of what's your timeline?
Well, Betsy, feel free to chime in here. I think June of 2021 is as soon as we'd have resources. I think there's potential that we could essentially lend or prepay SID payments, to get things started sooner, which are all things that those that, the property owners, not all, but some have agreed to do. So that's a way we can get things started sooner.
If it's helpful to me, share a little bit about
the board. I don't know, Betsy, if you can comment on how you're planning to form the board and potential timeline for that.
I only heard the first half of your question, Autumn, but I think answering the first question you asked, to share some background on kind of the way that SIDs work. A SID has an assessment on private property owners' property. That assessment gets collected, and then those funds can get dispersed to the special improvement district. And so that means that SID services funded to initiate and start work couldn't occur until that first collection happens, and that first
right. No, I understand that part. And Mark answered it that some of the property owners would advance or lend to the SID to get started before that first payment came from the county. My question is, you have funds to start. When are you all planning to form the board, and how are you thinking of compiling that board?
That occurred at the first annual meeting of the 5-4 Special Improvement District.
Right.
And the initial roster of board members were elected on September 15th. So that was inclusive of property owners that initiated the petitioning process for the creation of the SID, but then other board members can be added over the life of the SID. And right now, what those folks are doing is gathering community input and feedback on what potential programs and services might actually be manifest according to these categories. What the owners want the SID to accomplish is community planning, some level of environmental maintenance, supplemental security programs, a real desire to see some infrastructure and other improvements and potential promotions, and then general services to the folks that are defined as members, which is any property owner in there. But specific projects that fall within those categories haven't yet been identified, and they will be identified over 6 to 9 months, with the goal of potentially being able to implement the first of those projects once the resources are dispersed and available come June 21.
How many members were elected at the annual meeting, and what's the maximum number of members for the board?
9, and is the max. The city gets to appoint one. The city has yet to appoint that seat, and 8 were elected.
Who's the chair?
Because they're still in their formation process, they haven't yet elected officers.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mark, if we go to the next screen, it'll kind of give you, Autumn, some supplement to, the program, and service ideas. Betsy touched on this, but these are all things that have been discussed, nothing decided, just kind of put out in front of us and until we take further steps with the board. But I take it we're going to, these are the parameters of which some ideas that we want to address through engagement with the neighborhood. I can read through these
I think it's okay if we'll just leave them on the screen as we're talking and folks could read them, but I did have a question, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but a pretty common question I think that you hear when you talk about a SID from some property owners is, I already pay taxes. Aren't these things you should already be doing for me? So I thought I'd give you an opportunity, perhaps while we're looking at this list of projects, programs, services, and so forth, for you to kind of respond to that, not necessarily, going through each one in turn, but just generally as to how you feel this menu of services, if you will go above and beyond what folks generally get as part of their tax bill.
Well, I would say, again, and I speak from the good experience I had from being on the Short North SID board is, these are all extra services that you get. And, we're all about efficiency and, if we can run events and we can raise dollars and awareness for this district, we just don't see the downside. And, we all know how taxed our city is with resources, particularly now after COVID, and, the issues with, graffiti and, it's great having a walkable entertainment district that, many of us want. And the reason we're here is in anticipation that many of the people that live in the communities that we develop, it's a vital, amenity, if not the vital amenity as to why people live down here, is the walkability. But with that comes security issues, a host of, sadly, a big part of a lot of the issues we're facing are with homeless, and the experience I've had on the SID board in terms of responsibly handling homeless issues. There's just, tons of services that come out of a well-run SID district that are well beyond what you expect as a normal taxpayer. Now, I understand. I say that with an experience, of seeing it from the inside out, and I understand why, people that this, and I don't think Betsy nor I or anybody associated this, in COVID times, and I'm kind of tired of using a COVID as an excuse for everything, but communications were incredibly challenging through the period of time. And unfortunately, the clock doesn't stop for us. So, this is something we talked about for a long time with property owners. And, if we missed our windows, our clock didn't stop because of COVID. So we were limited in our ability to communicate, and yet we could get no relief on the schedule. And we understand, why there would be stress, and, I'd be the first to admit, it seems, the whole process of which you can put assessments on yourself seems, whether it's a SID or any other form of special assessment, people in town, you can get together with your neighbors and 60% of your front foot, you can put sidewalks in and everybody has to pay for it, So, I don't think we're here to comment on whether that part of the law is right or wrong. It's, we see the benefit from it, and, that's essentially how we got here. And we have a history with the Short North SID. I say this not to, that wasn't exactly supported by everybody, but I think everybody that's seen the benefits of a well-run SID district can all agree that there's little that they wouldn't do to support the Short North SID. And again, I think that's where we're headed in very short order. But that's how I'd answer that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So please proceed.
So I think there's, is there one last, is there, yeah, so here's the feedback it was submitted to the city clerk. We had a property owner that expressed concern regarding the timing of assessments relative to the pandemic. I think I touched on that a little bit. We would all admit this is horrible timing, but the way these things set up, it's not like you can just take a month off, or you got to sit back for a whole year. And we look at what good can come out of this, and we know that although projects have been delayed in the area, we're not aware of any ones that have been fully set back. Cameron's project's coming on later this year, so we still think it's really good timing to get this stuff in place as these projects push on through COVID. One condo association had several members express concerns regarding the SID creation process and potential duplication of services that are already provided and supported by that individual condo association's common area fees. And if we flip the page, we came up with, I don't think any of us disagree with that. In a perfect world, there'd be less if it wasn't the linear nature that is needed by law to do these type of SIDs. We're in total support of reducing fees as it relates to condominium associations. We have an incredibly collaborative property ownership group on the apartment side, and that's where a majority of this is coming from in terms of linear footage. So if we could get relief to the condominium associations that have been pulled in, I think we're all, I know the board members are in full support of that, or the formation of the board members. So anyways, they're below there. However, there's plenty of precedent already in other SIDs locally where condo owners who have included a provision in their condo declaration documents where common fees were collected for some services similar to the SID contribute fully to the SID. So we know there's probably a precedent out there that doesn't necessarily give relief to condo owners. I think we'd like to see us give relief, but we understand there's precedent out there, and we'll take the good wisdom of this board.
So if you give a reduction in their assessment, that means they wouldn't receive the service that they're claiming they already received privately, right?
Well, Betsy helped me out here, but I don't think we ever, the services are provided, uniformly for the district for the most part. Maybe not every service. Graffiti removal, things like that could be potentially limited, but what we see, working with the city to contribute to, public art, intersection improvements that we might contribute to in an effort to, seed participation from out, the whole community is going to get benefit of that. So, Betsy, you might comment specifically about how services might be restrained.
Sure. So, and a couple things there. I think the first thing is, in the conversations that we had during a really great meeting on September 15th. That was a public meeting that many of the folks who submitted objections were able to attend. I think there is a lot of care for this area, and a lot of want to see a lot of the same things made manifest that are included in the plan of services for this new special improvement district. And, it is the case that because of the contiguousness factor, there are a few condo properties that are included in the SID service area boundary. And it's also the case that some of those condo area properties, they may have some of those very basic environmental services that are a component of what they've chosen as homeowners to come together and self-fund for themselves. So I think we candidly really do look upon the wisdom of this board to figure out, does it make sense to issue some level of reduction by what some of those services are? And, if that means that there's not a graffiti removal program on certain properties and parcels because of that accommodation, and I'm just using that as an example, it could be other things. That certainly is allowable. But, there is a substantial benefit that does come from all of the programs and services that are a component of the special improvement district beyond that level of items that may be provided for by an HOA. What I think we have heard from the community and certainly heard on September 15th is that, this particular area, and I know that there's some comparisons that you could draw to High Street in the Short North, but they are different. And what we have heard loud and clear in community feedback through the web form and in the meeting on September 15th is there is a real want to see unity on these two streets in this corridor, and that the nature of who this is serving is folks that are not necessarily from outside of the neighborhood, but they are really the community that is right on the street in this neighborhood. And so the types of programs and services, while you may draw some comparisons to what you see along the High Street corridor, the scale of them and how they're implemented would be different, and they would be in many ways a little bit more residentially oriented than just commercially oriented too. And that idea of community and unity and how the programs are implemented is something that has come up over and over again through the feedback that's been received. So in the spirit of unity, it seems like there's an opportunity for everyone to find a way to see a program or service that does meet their needs, whatever that assessment ultimately is deemed to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think theoretically, I was thinking that if a condo association said, we don't want your graffiti removal services, you're charging us too much, lower our assessment, and then they go, and then you still provide that service, that they could then in turn reduce their HOA fee. Theoretically, it sounds improbable. So then they could then receive a free service from the SID that they're having a reduced assessment for. Again, I think it's highly improbable, but I think that's something we should keep in mind if people are asking to get their assessments reduced, but have the same level of services of those who didn't have their assessments reduced. So we can move on.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond to that?
We wish there was more flexibility to how these things are formed, but unfortunately we got to deal with the rules that we have, and so Betsy, wouldn't you say we're limited on, how, we had some ideas early on to flex this thing, but we kept running into, problems with, the law and how they have to operate.
Let me ask you this, and in talking, again, we're not at the point yet of talking about specific properties or specific parcels. We're talking generalities. However, a number of the folks who will be talking with us tonight, I understand they all used a very similar letter, mentioned that they're paying typically a condo fee of $2,000 or so annually. What I don't know anyway, and I haven't really been able to glean from the documents, is the average assessment, or however it can be expressed, an average assessment of properties within the SID district. Can you comment on that? And do you have a number that we can sort of think about as we're moving forward?
Dave, I'm happy to share a little bit of info that we had looked up in advance of that September meeting. But if there's a deeper dive that needs to be done on that, we can certainly provide that in follow up. For the condo parcels that express some objections, I want to say the average assessment per parcel was $200. For the commercial property that had expressed an objection, I want to say, and Caitlin, I know that you had that number in your head. That was that somewhere in the neighborhood of like $1,500 maybe as an annualized assessment for that commercial property.
Yes.
One over a collection of this commercial property.
Okay, that helps as we're.
And does that help? And that's annual. That's an annual number, Dave.
I think that was helpful. Did my colleagues have other questions?
Well, there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to go back in the slideshow, Mark, to where they're showing where the SID is going to go above and beyond what an HOA would provide, like community planning, public art, landscaping, advocating for bike lanes, traffic. I mean, it's pretty clear the SID's put out what they're going to do. That's not that an HOA or condo association is not doing. So that's clear to me. So I don't know if anyone else wants to address that question in the chat. And then I had a question about the state regulation for the 60% of owners with having 60% of frontage on public streets, I believe is what the code says. And I wanted to know, are Cornelius and Neruda and Waldron and Civitas, are those public streets? Because they don't feel like public streets. They feel like apartment streets that aren't, part of the city. So I just wanted to know, were those used in the calculation for the frontage, and are they public?
Well,
Those
probably
are public
don't.
streets.
Yeah, they're.
The short answer is they are public streets.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. They're not built fully, so the reason they don't feel public is, and believe me, we feel the pain. The city won't enforce parking, sane parking requirements on those streets until they're built and turned over. But the right of way is always been dedicated and makes that public.
But they're paid for by the developer, right?
Yes, they're paid for by the developer, but owned by the city. We put the improvements in, but the land underneath those is publicly owned.
Okay, cool. So those are public.
Okay. Matt, I don't know if this helps you, but there's a case that's very similar to that in the Short North area. If you're familiar with the Victorian Gate Condo Association, identical circumstance where that was a private development, but the streets became public streets. Initially, the streets were built privately, but then became public, and it's public right of way. Okay,
cool. Oh, the reason I forgot to say, the reason I brought that up is because one of the letters, the objector letters, mention the phrase, we don't even live on a public street, we live on a private street. So that kind of threw me there in one of the letters.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This is Laura Baker Marsh with the City Attorney's Office. I just wanted to read into the record the question that was in the Q&A. I realize that the board members have been able to see it, but it's not read into the record. Actually, even though this is being recorded, it's my understanding that the Q&A doesn't necessarily get preserved, so I'm going to read it, if that's all right. It says, what
Please.
Services would this SID provide that we don't already get ourselves, i.e. what is the benefit to us as a condo association that this fee would provide? And as I said, I believe the board members had already seen the question, but I just want to make sure it was read into the record. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I sort of touched on that earlier, and you responded in part, but maybe if you want to address that further, Mr. Wagenbrenner or your colleagues, For example, I think folks may be looking at things like trash cans along the street. Most folks would expect the city to provide trash cans along the street. Maybe they're not the same trash cans. Maybe they're not serviced in the same way. But
if I can speak to that, Dave, real
please.
quick, if it's helpful to you. So, again, leading a SID in a different area and being asked to, help with the formation here. On High Street, for example, City of Columbus comes every other day, empties trash cans. Our trash cans are overflowing, though, every day. So on the days that the trash cans, the city doesn't come and get, we empty them, and, therefore you get a higher level of public service than you're able to provide, than the city is able to provide to a specific area. That's just using the trash cans as an example, but, certainly there's a want or an interest to see a level of environmental maintenance. But then there's a want and an interest to see some bigger, broader things like community planning and unification efforts through events and activities that candidly the city just isn't going to provide in such an isolated area in and of itself. And I'm going to have to apologize. I have a little baby here that wants to eat her dinner, and so I'm going to continue to listen in, but I might not be able to as readily answer your questions from here on out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I might, being, the flowers, we would replace flowers and on a regular basis in the Short North SID, the ambassador program, if somebody has a problem, again, a very sensitive way to address, people that the ambassadors would go down, they would, in some cases escort people home that didn't feel safe. There's just, so many, and again, for every dollar that was contributed to the, by assessment, more than $1 was raised through events. So, I probably can't speak enough about all the benefit that it's brought to Short North, and that's what we're really hoping we capture here quickly. And not to mention dollars, the people in the Short North contributed dollars through the SID, and it really was the catalyst to get the city to, the sidewalk initiatives, and politically it really brought everybody together behind a sustained plan of capital improvement projects that, essentially Betsy and her group helped, organize the city and everybody behind. So we see all those benefits coming here quickly.
Okay. Could we go back to the map, Mark? And there were a couple of questions from objectors, but also I think perhaps from us as board members about some properties, some that are and some that aren't included in the SID district. In particular, as I'm looking at the map, and I'm looking at a bigger, more detailed map because it was available on the SID's website and I downloaded it. So folks, bear with me here. Just north of 2nd Avenue, there is the large square parcel to the east. It is connected to the SID district by a very thin strip of frontage on 2nd Avenue, but it looks like it might not normally have been included in the SID district. Is that what I might describe as a voluntary participant in the SID?
Yes, that's Avenue Partners. That's the large apartment project that was built. Avenue Partners, they're, very much supportive of the SID and essentially volunteered that.
And so, again, a SID district is established, but others, as long as it's contiguous, others who are adjacent to the properties that would normally be included in the district can volunteer to become part of it. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. And that helped, that creates more front footage, to spread, so yeah, really everything you see, the thing that was critical is that spine you talked about, both along 4th and 5th. And
right.
Then I can say all those other parcels, I think were all voluntary.
Okay. And that's probably going to dovetail into my next couple of questions. Just south of that is a property that I think is occupied by the State Library of Ohio, but it would not normally have been included in the SID district anyway. Is that right?
Well, I don't think they volunteered to be in it, so, and they did, that's a unique parcel, because of its historic, it's a warehouse building and, very, I would say the utility of that building is very low. Knowing the developer, I know that if that property were ever to be able to be redeveloped, I would expect it to come quickly into the TIF area.
Okay. Just to the west of that, there is a parcel, I think it's JDS Battery. Again, they apparently didn't volunteer to be part of the SID. They wouldn't normally have been included in the SID district because they didn't have frontage on 4th Street. Is that correct?
I'm not sure of the specific parcel. Did you say JDS Properties?
JDS Battery, I think, is the property owner is listed, and I think how they trade. I think it's a battery store or commercial or manufacturing, perhaps. But
I'm not sure what parcel we're speaking of. And so, just a little, once, how this all works is once, and I know Betsy's busy, but, once we get enough of the people that want to be in there, there's a bit of, experts that kind of pull the map to make sure it all stays contiguous. So, again, if there were more flexibilities within the law, this map would probably look more like a lot more parcels left out. But, essentially we hire consultants and attorneys to help us keep this compliant, and this, it's not perfect, but this is what we get to get it started. And that's how we got here.
I understand. So actually, I'm sort of coming around the long way to a question that I think a number of folks have asked, and you touched on it earlier. That is the reserve properties south of Auden, north of Cornelius, and east of 6th Street that, to the observer of this map, might think they were excluded from the SID district. But I think you explained they weren't excluded, they simply didn't volunteer to be part of it, or they were not volunteered. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. And some of those are owned by, they're owned by the new community authority, which is, they don't participate in, it's basically public land. Like the big square in one of the big squares in the middle there is going to be a park eventually, and it's owned by a SID or a new community authority. So, but again, those, the reason that looks like it is it was all, for the most part, all voluntary, other than the spine, those are our apartment parcels.
Right. The petitioners, those approached with the petition who needed to make up the proportion that would actually create the SID, included those parcels along 4th Street and 5th Avenue. They did not necessarily include those parcels that volunteered to become part of the SID, correct?
Correct.
Although those might have had an impact on the proportions of those who responded affirmatively?
Correct.
Okay. And then just one quick question about the map, and we may need to come back to this, and I appreciate everyone's time. We may be taking more time than we have, and I'm hoping somebody will let me know if that's true. There is a little gap at Warren Street, where Warren Street doesn't appear to be within the SID district. And in a sense, it almost appears to wrap around those properties we were talking about a moment ago and sort of come back up from the bottom. Is that accurate, or is that just the way the map is constructed?
This
is Caitlin. I can help, Mark. That's a church property, so technically the property is exempt.
Okay, which property is the church property? Because what I'm seeing is simply that. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Mark, can you put your pointer on the screen? It's in the left. Keep going down. down. You need to go west or left. Down, right there.
Ah. I'm actually referring to just north of that, above the blue square, right there. That strip, which is actually Warren Street, almost appears to interrupt the SID district. Is that just a function of the way the map was constructed, or is that actually not included in the district?
That's just kind of how the map is drawn, but that little kind of strip area is still part of that blue area.
Okay.
That's the street right away there. That's Warren's got that little boulevard part, but that's for, I think it's just right away, the way it's drawn.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification then.
And then also, I just want to, I think, make a correction. The State of Ohio Library parcel is not in it. It's the big white one at 6th and 2nd.
Right.
It's that one.
It's not in it.
It's
right.
not in
Yeah.
it. Just to clarify.
Exactly, yes. And I was asking, in fact, or using that as an illustration of a property that would basically need to volunteer to be part of the district. It wouldn't normally be included in the SID boundaries because it didn't front on 4th Street.
Got it. Do we need to read the questions in the chat, Laura?
Yes, we do. So there are a number of questions being raised in the chat, and I would just caution everybody, you're going to have your opportunity to speak and to ask questions of the panelists. But we do also need to make sure that these are preserved as a public record, so they are going to need to be read so that those who are observing this online can see them, because only the people participating can actually see them.
Laura, would it be appropriate for me to read those questions then?
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay. And I'm assuming that I can omit the name of the questioner and just read the questions into the record. Is that correct?
Actually, the name would also be public.
Okay. All right. So let's do that. And again, appreciate the patience of our guests, all of them, as we take some time to talk about this. There was a question, and actually I think I've tried to address that, from Larissa Brophy, who I believe is one of the objectors. And that is, why is there a circle in the lower right corner excluding the townhomes built by Wagenbrenner, but Mulberry privately owned properties were included? I think we talked about that, but I'll let you go ahead and respond, Mr. Wagenbrenner, if you wish to do so now.
Sure. Or Caitlin, if you can help too. They touch 4th Street, essentially. We developed a condo right next to Mulberry's project, Galleon, which is the long skinny, and that's included as well. That the time that got pulled in, it was a contiguous parcel to 4th.
Correct. It's all in the effort to be contiguous.
Which is a requirement of the SID. The mechanism of the SID cannot work if they're not contiguous.
Correct.
Also then from Ms. Brophy, I am a private condo owner and not directly on 4th Street. She goes on to say, Senco Lane is a private lane and does not receive services.
I don't know specifically where that is, but if it's a condo, they might, unfortunately, a condo parcel is the whole parcel, and they might have their own separate, ID number, but they all rest on a larger condo. And I suspect that condo is there because it's adjacent to or pulled into the 4th Street.
Okay.
Fine.
And she adds, I'm not necessarily reading these in order, but Ms. Brophy also adds later, Mulberry did not volunteer and we are not contiguous. We are the condo association that objected. However, the Mulberry, if I'm looking the map correctly, the Mulberry property, the larger property is contiguous in the district. Is that correct?
If it's 25 Jeffrey Place, it's definitely contiguous.
Okay. I think we'll come back to address those perhaps during the presentation when Ms. Brophy has an opportunity to speak with us. Let me go to some of the other comments then quickly. Gary Underwood, again, I believe is one of the objectors. He says, still not sure why certain properties were excluded from the SID. Wagon Brenner properties, for example, but 25 Jeffrey Park was included. He goes on to say, let's see, how many Wagon Brenner condos are in the same parcel? Again, these, by the way, some of these comments may have come before you spoke to this question, but do you want to add anything to address those specific questions?
No, I mean, other than, like I said, we have the exact same condition to the south of 25 where those condo buildings are, that got pulled in because it was on the parcel that was adjacent to 4th. And understand, we basically said, yes, we think it's a great idea. We'll contribute to our apartment properties. And just like other landlords in the district said they wanted to form a SID, that gave a baseline of properties that they could build from, and essentially they took 60% thereabouts. We didn't even have anything to do with the eventual map. I mean, the map came back to us, and and this is as efficient as we could make it.
Okay. And for the record, I do see Rebecca Kronk, also listed among the objectors, said, that does not make sense. Jeffrey Park didn't volunteer. Again, these are not synchronous with your comments, and you may have actually answered that question, but that was her comment in the chat. Let me suggest that we, as Attorney Baker Morris suggested, try to avoid using chat just because, again, it causes us perhaps to kind of back up and try to make sure those questions were answered. We'll try to make sure that those questions are answered during the individual testimony or subsequent to the testimony of each of the objectors, if that's all right. So I think those are all the questions. There were a few administrative comments in the chat, but I don't think there's anything else that I need to read into the record. Is that right? Okay. Any other questions from my colleagues?
No questions for me. I think if any of the objectors are ready to present, or if the team, if the fifth, fourth SID team has any final remarks before we move on.
Yes, thank you for that suggestion. So, Mr. Wagenbrenner or your colleagues, if you'd like to make any closing remarks, this would be a great time. Thank you.
So the only remark is, and I think this might help clarity, not everybody along the spine volunteered. As long as we have 60% of the people that are in the area, they essentially can stretch over the other 40%, just like any assessment. And I'm not sure where the assessment law comes from, but I know on my street where I grew up, we wanted to put sidewalks in, and not everybody agreed. We got 60% of the people to agree on our street that we wanted to do sidewalks, and the other 40% weren't exactly thrilled about it, but that's the law. And so we're not saying that everybody volunteered here. We're saying everybody beyond that spine, and those are the ones that volunteered to be pulled in, and again, we're following the law to set these SIDs up. They're not perfect, but that's the law we have to work with.
Understood. Let me ask you a question which you may certainly not be able to answer for any other developer, including perhaps the developer of the Mulberry project. You develop condominium projects or products, correct?
Yes.
And if a product that you develop is included in a SID district, as you explained a little earlier, that property, that parcel, if it is contiguous with the SID district and if it has frontage along the center of the SID district, that entire parcel would be generally included in the SID district. Is that right?
As the way this map's drawn, yes. Yeah.
Would it be your practice, again, you can't comment on anyone else's practice, but it would be your practice to inform buyers of those condominium properties of the fact they were subject to an assessment because their condominium property was part of a larger property within a SID district.
Yeah, I mean, we would disclose that if we knew what the map was eventually going to look like. You know, you understand, we said, yeah, we'll put these parcels in a SID. We think it's a great idea. And then the SID maps got formed to center around 4th, and that's how we got here.
Okay. And again, I'm not necessarily implying that somebody should have gotten notice that didn't get notice. It may be a question of timing, when their properties were purchased and so forth. We haven't gotten to any of that, but I just want to establish that it would be your practice, once a SID had been established, to let the buyers know that they were within a SID district.
Yep, when it got formed.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. So let's go ahead, I think, at this point and move to hearing from the objectors. Let me ask, by the way, our city attorney's office. I realized that I didn't do all the things I would normally do or should normally have done to convene the meeting prior to the presentation by Mr. Wagenbrenner. I'm assuming we don't need to cure that at this point.
I believe, Mr. Chair, that we are good to go.
Okay.
Particularly since you were sworn on the record and you were just sworn in today, and we did announce the meeting and call that this was a meeting specifically for this purpose, and that it's all being recorded. I think we're good.
Okay. Let me then go ahead and kind of return to the practice that was suggested, and that is take this opportunity to ask all of those who wish to speak as objectors to come forward and to be sworn in rather than swear you in at each point in the presentation. And now I have that language in front of me, so I can do that, even though it's pretty simple language. If that's okay, I'd like to ask all, I'm sorry? I couldn't hear that.
Dave, you may hear some echo right now. All of the objectors have the ability to mute and unmute themselves as a part of the swearing-in process, hence the echo. So I would say just go ahead and proceed, and either Ms. Burks or the objectors themselves should be able to unmute themselves for the oath.
Very good. Okay, so if the objectors would raise their right hand, and we're sort of on the honor system here that you're doing that, and if you would repeat after me, please, again, raise your right hand to be sworn in. I wish to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. Please answer, I will.
I will.
Thank you. Okay. And we have alphabetized the speakers in order to try to get some order in our presentation. So let me go ahead and call first on the property owners with last name Brady and Carr. Are they present here tonight?
I do not, just Brady and Carr.
Okay. A property owner with last name Brophy. Are you present?
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Thank you. Let me go ahead then and recognize you and ask you to go ahead. We do have the letter that you submitted to the city clerk, but please go ahead and tell us a little bit about your objections to the assessment and being included in the SID district.
So I apologize. My dogs are barking because my husband just came home, and so he might be able to join us. But our biggest objective, especially after listening to this, is and my objections have been read. We did not volunteer. We were contacted. Our HOA was contacted to volunteer at the time. We were never told we were on a partial. We are not contiguous with 4th Street. There is actually another condo association, which I don't know their name, that faces 4th Street fully, and we actually are off of 4th Street with the Wagenbrenner properties. I'm not aware that we hold the same partial parcel as they do. I would need to verify that information myself. But that is basically, we are not contiguous. We did not volunteer. I do not believe we're on the same parcel. We pay our own HOA fees. We pay into the Jeffrey Park assessment, special assessment already. And so we're just getting extras added on. It's not even that much money, but the fact that we were asked, we said no, and we're not even on 4th Street. I don't understand why we were included, but then all the Wagenbrenner townhomes were excluded.
Okay.
Just to clarify about the contiguousness, it's not with 4th Street, it's with parcels. So all of the parcels in the SID have to be touching one another. It's not that the parcels have to be on 4th Street. So you're touching a parcel that touches 4th Street, which makes you contiguous.
Sounds like your problem, not mine.
Well, it's okay, then I would have to look at the map because I don't think that's the case with all properties along 4th Street.
All the properties touch all the other properties in some way. Like they're all connected to each other. There aren't any freestanding island properties.
No, we're not, but there's a freestanding island parcel in the middle of this big circle. That's the Wagenbrenner townhomes that were excluded.
And I think we tried to touch on that earlier. As I understand it, as Mr. Wagenbrenner explained it, that island, that big white space that you're referring to, was not excluded. The parcels around it were volunteers. And my colleagues certainly correct me if I'm mistaken. But
Wagenbrenner volunteered his own properties to make sure that they had 60% of the signatures that they needed for the approval of the SID. And somehow we were included inside of it, apparently because we touched the parcel. Why, if we touched the parcel, were we even asked as an HOA to be included? And we said no. That doesn't even make sense to me. Our HOA president was contacted independently and asked to volunteer to be included, and he declined the inclusion.
so let me ask staff to confirm. That decision normally wouldn't be up to the HOA. It would be up to the owner of the property. It isn't really a question for the HOA itself. And depending on when the SID was established, the owner of the parcel on which your condo properties sit might very well not include the condominium owners. It would be the developer at that point in many cases.
No, because we were in here before the SID was established.
We were in, some properties were sold and bought before the SID was established.
Ms. Brophy, you mentioned that there's a condo association that touches 4th Street. I'm looking at your address on the map. The condos that line 4th Street are a different association than yours?
Correct.
Okay.
They are brick facade. They were built several years ago. We're inside of that. There is actually an alley between that condo association and ourselves. And then I actually live on Simcoe Lane, which is a private lane that we have to pay for our own services. So we have verified with the city that no snow removal would be done on our private lane. We're not even a private or a public street, which you guys mentioned that earlier as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's several properties that are on Simcoe Lane that were included in the SID.
Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, can I be recognized?
Please.
Mr. Chair, this is the City Attorney's Office. I just wanted to remind the board that while there may be concerns about which properties ought to have been included or not included in the SID, the duties of the Assessment Equalization Board don't include determining who should or should not be in the SID. That is a determination that's ultimately made and has been made by City Council. what this board is able to do is to determine whether the amount of the assessment, the apportionment of the assessment, or whether or not the assessment was in fact made against a lot or parcel that is in the SID. So if there's somebody was improperly assessed who should not have been assessed because they were not in City Council's approval of the SID, then that would be something that the assessment board could consider. But if they were actually assessed properly in the sense that they were included in the SID, then it would only be within the Equalization Assessment Board's power to determine whether or not the assessment was an appropriate amount or appropriate.
So our request is for it to be 0.
I'm sorry, please repeat that.
Our request is for our assessment to be 0 because we're not contiguous with 4th Street.
Okay, well, again, at this point, we don't have the option of declaring that you are not contiguous with 4th Street. You're part of the SID district. Let's return, if I could, rather than have multiple objectors speaking, let me return to Ms. Brophy because she is the one who's been recognized and talk about her specific objection. Did you have other objections, Ms. Brophy?
I think that was the main objections for the SID. I still don't understand it, but I don't think that I need to because it doesn't matter whether I understand it or not. I've been assessed a fee that I'm going to have to pay because I have been drawn into an arbitrary map that included Mark Wagenbrenner property, so 60% of the signet could be reached. And I just don't see how that's fair, but life isn't fair, is it?
Let me address one of the things you mentioned in your letter. You indicated you received no notification concerning the creation of the SID or any aspect, apparently, of the petition or anything else. Did you reside at that property in March of this year?
I received a notification that I had been assessed and that I was going to be charged a fee next year on my property. That was the notification that I received. And yes, I bought this I actually just celebrated 1 year in this location.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get at is we understand from the SID, creators of the SID, that letters were mailed to owners by certified mail in June. Would that have included individual condo owners of record within that parcel, I guess, is the question I'm trying to ask. And I don't know if I can pose that question to Mr. Wagenbrenner at this point.
Where's our copy of ours?
Is there anyone on the call who can establish whether letters would have been mailed to condominium owners within the parcel in question?
I can help. Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, all the letters were sent to property owners, and as Betsy mentioned, certified mailing went to tax addresses, but then all property owners also received a mailing.
And this was the letter that explained that a SID was being formed and they had an opportunity to participate in that conversation and also to object? Is that right?
No, this was the notification letter per the city. Once council passed, that we sent that letter out to them saying that an assessment was passed on their property.
Okay, so let me clarify. Would condominium owners have been included in the discussions that actually led to City Council's creation of the SID? That's what I'm trying to establish.
Not via mailings, but several community conversations were had at the Italian Village Society meeting and in other places, but not via a mailing.
Okay. So Ms. Brophy may be correct in saying the first notice that she received was the letter indicating that there was an assessment due, the notice to property owners of June 30th. Is that right?
To direct property owner mailings, yes, that is right.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Brophy, any other comments? And again, I think because we have a number of property owners who are similarly situated, I don't think we will discuss this as a board after each objector. I think we'll come back at the end and try to discuss what we've heard. So let me ask you if you have any other comments to add, then we'll again talk with some of your neighbors and then come back as a board and discuss what we've heard, if you don't mind.
I think I'll let the other individuals in 25 Jeffrey Park speak, and I would really like for you to speak with Gary Underwood because I think he's probably the best representative of our community here. So.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
On the chance that perhaps Mr. Underwood will say things that other property owners will agree sort of encapsulate their comments, I'm going to ask him to speak then out of alphabetical order. I've been given a list in alphabetical order, and Underwood is at the very end of the list, but maybe we can help things move a little faster if I ask Mr. Underwood to speak next. Mr. Underwood, are you here?
Mr. Paul, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, very good. So a lot of pressure from Larissa there. I'm not sure that I will do the group justice, but I appreciate that. So just so I'm clear on what we're here to discuss, can I ask? Are we asking questions or just giving testimony? Because I have some questions that didn't get answered.
I'm actually looking at our city attorney's office to confirm that we have the discretion to let you ask questions at this point. I think we.
Mr. Chair, yes, if you can choose to either allow him to testify specifically regarding the objections that he's raised, or he can ask some questions. Again, the determination as to whether or not you answer those questions depends on the question asked.
Fair enough. So let me go ahead and take that discretion and invite you to go ahead and ask your questions.
All right, we'll try to keep this from deteriorating into a presidential debate here.
Thank you.
So, I think, and I don't speak for all of my neighbors, but I think we've talked a lot about this, and I understand about. I think we have a lot of shared common concerns here, and I don't think anyone objects to the value of the SID. I think there's probably some incremental value to the entire neighborhood through this. I think we all question the timing of this and how it was done. It has always felt as if it was jammed on us, and we've never felt as if we had, proper notification, ability to object early, notification that it was going before council, that this was something that we should participate in. I think you would have had more buy-in, particularly from my neighbors and myself, had the process not been handled so under the radar. And we're here today probably with blood pressure up because it does seem so purposeful that we were not brought into this. One of my questions, and all of us, we look at this map and we look at the giant hole in the donut that is this SID, and I still don't think we understand why all of those properties are excluded. One of my questions is going to be if those areas that did volunteer to go into the SID that weren't contiguous, when they wrapped around all of those very expensive condos and townhomes, did that not make it contiguous by the voluntary actions of those property owners around? Because now it does look like it's really providing a huge benefit to those residents, and they don't have to pay for anything. And no matter what you tell me, Mr. Wagenbrenner, your residents, the people that have bought from you, benefit from the amount of money that we are all paying in, and it costs them nothing. And that is a huge problem for us, a huge problem for my neighbors, for me, and for the business owners that are also, notwithstanding COVID right now, struggling at the moment. And they look at that map and they feel like we are subsidizing all of the people that were excluded. And I get you didn't write this law, and I'm not saying you are not following the law, but I do believe the perception of the SID is already very, very negative. And I think, in addition to just objecting the way this was handled, what I think we would like to see, and I don't know if this is something that can come from legal counsel at the city or from the SID, but I think we would like to have a letter that dictates exactly what the timeline was, the notifications that occurred, and an analysis of those parcels that were excluded, and what that might do in the financial to the financials of the SID if they were included, and how that would lower the cost for everyone else. Because I think if we had a better understanding of all this and didn't feel like we were being jammed and subsidizing all of our neighbors, which are lovely people, but if we didn't feel like we were being forced to do something without consent or having a voice, we would feel much more interested in being a participant in this. But at the moment, just the way this has been handled has not been, has certainly not won you any friends in this neighborhood where we live. So if we could get, I think our request would have something in writing from council explaining exactly what happened, who was communicated, how it was shared through whether it's a legal ad or a notification to the public billboard, or I'm sorry, a public message board. We would like to know more about that and how the analysis was done on the fees that we're all being assessed. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Mr. Underwood. Can I ask a question, Chair Paul?
Please.
And Mark or Caitlin, if you can answer this question, looking at what's being referred to as that donut, it's held in an LLC, those two donuts. Are those the community authority properties that you're, the Jeffrey New Day LLC, are those the ones that you mentioned, Mark and Caitlin, as becoming a park eventually? Is that why those were excluded? I just want to make sure we answer that clearly.
The southernmost part of that donut area, yes.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Mr. Underwood, that that's going to become a park and that's why there's that donut?
Well, the park is empty land. The donut I'm talking about are the $900,000 homes that border the park.
Yeah, he's talking about
the $700,000 homes that go.
I got you. Just north of there.
Yeah, north of Cornelius and between Cornelius and Neruda, I think he's talking about.
It's a very, very valuable donut home. So what would our assessment be if they were all included? Because it's clear to every single person who looks at that map that those people, lovely though they may be, will benefit from all of the goodness that comes out of the third SID. So why, and I appreciate I love a loophole, but in this case, it doesn't benefit me or my neighbors, and all of those people will get an awful lot of benefit from this great thing that you say is coming. And clearly it is, because we're not here to stop it. We're here to figure out how we cannot be assessed as much for it. And I'm just saying those people in those areas, if they were included, it would be less of a burden for everyone, my neighbors included, and all the businesses in this SID. And I hope we're hearing from some of those people tonight too, because I know many of them are very, very upset how this whole thing went down.
So is that a potential modification? I'm sorry, Dave. Is that a potential modification option for that other kind? I don't know if those condos north of there, maybe Matt, are a part of a condo association, but that wasn't a modification listed in the SID proposal. I wonder if that's a modification that's possible. Mark or anybody.
The GIS data doesn't, I don't think it says if it's HOA. It says it's a fee simple
No.
townhome. So I don't know that I can answer if they have an HOA or not.
All of those properties have an HOA.
Hmm.
And Mr. Wagner, aren't those condos there? Aren't they on? I mean, you have standalone single-family homes, but you also have condos that should be a parcel because they're similar to ours.
We didn't create the map. We volunteered the apartment projects that we had towards the formation of the SID. And
Yeah,
then the
I
map
understand.
was
I
formed
understand, but
later.
that wasn't, that wasn't my question.
It was never our intention to pick who was in it and who wasn't. We volunteered all the projects that we own as apartments that we control. We don't long-term control condo associations. So I suspect, now that I see it, what happened was the condo parcel that we had was one big parcel, and it got split later on. It was, so the front is an apartment piece, the back is now a condo. But at the time all this started, all this was done within the last, 10 months, so, I have a feeling that they picked up large parcels that later got split. And that's why, those look the way they, I didn't form the map. You act like we have this big, to lay it to people. You know what? We could give it, we volunteered our properties. We're putting our money where our mouth is. We want this to go forward in a very, at this point, if this goes away, I got a lot of other things to worry about in this world. We thought this was going to be a good thing for the residents, and you pretty much say out of one side of your mouth that that's how you see it. And, hey man, I'm tired. I got,
Let me just interject.
all the freaking time, and I'm tired. And you know what? You figure it out. That's what I feel like saying. We'll pull our properties out. We tried. It's ridiculous. We had nothing to do with the formation of the map. And,
Well, I had nothing to do with the formation of the SID. I'm just here asking questions for the first time. I mean, I've had no visibility into this, so this is why me and my neighbors have been frustrated because we've been on the outside. I understand you've been working hard on this for a while because you just, it sounds like you've put a lot of effort into it. But here we are asking the questions for the first time. So I just, I'm sorry that my questions are very basic. I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth. We don't know anything about this, and I think we, are very curious. So
yeah. So I mean, how it basically they they take 60% of the front footage and they go to create a map without intention to include those that they think should be in it, and that's how this happened. So we supported a reduction in fees, and we still do, and so we hope that it's not perfect. In a perfect world, we'd have a way to jump around and not make it contiguous. In a perfect world, we would not be facing COVID, and we would have had, the intentions here are pure. It's a thing we're trying to do well for the neighborhood. I'll be the first to admit, it's not like the short north where it's solid commercial from one end to the other. And parcels got pulled in because of their contiguous nature. And it isn't perfect. And we can agree to reduce the fee. I hope we can convince the board to do that. But I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, this stuff, this is how these things get formed. It's like, it's not perfect. We've said that from the beginning. But there were no misintents. I mean, we're doing this for all the right reasons. This will be good for our neighborhood. And, just like we didn't randomly pull properties in that were away from 4th Street with intention, everybody that contributed were doing it for the betterment of this neighborhood. Good things are going to happen here. And we wish there was a fair way to do it. There's just not. We're limited by the laws.
I think what we're saying there, that if we keep talking about contiguous and I keep looking at the map and I don't see anything anything about that hole in the middle of it that tells me this is contiguous.
The only
60
reason there's a
footer
hole,
requirement or
the only
not.
reason there's a hole is because we volunteered everything around it at our cost.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably contributing more than half the money to this. I mean, Caitlin, you could probably reply. More than half the money is voluntarily put up by us, not passed through to our tenants. It's stuff that we're contributing to try to get this off the ground because we see it as a better good for the whole community.
Sure. No,
I could be convinced
understand.
differently. You know, I'm tired. I'm really
Yeah,
tired.
I appreciate that. But we pay a lot of fees to be there, and a lot of that goes to the development of those streets and those sidewalks, and now we're paying more, and it does not seem fair when you look at that. And I still, with all due respect, sir, I still, if I could get counsel to give me an answer on, and maybe you have, I don't really fully understand all of this because it's not my world, but if by volunteering all those other properties around there, does that not make the property in the middle contiguous with the entire district? That's what I think we'd also like to know the answer to that.
Well,
Okay.
just because the property is contiguous doesn't mean it has to be included. It's that contiguousness is a requirement for inclusion. It doesn't obligate a parcel to inclusion. And Laura, I'm actually struggling to see which part of Mr. Underwood's argument is actually relevant to the three matters this board can even discuss. I don't feel like any of them are.
I was about to say pretty much the same thing. We can pass Mr. Underwood's request along to City Council, but I don't believe that this board could take any action on that request. That council provide additional information about how the SID was constructed. Is that correct, City Attorney?
That would be correct. I mean, it's certainly a request that can be made that we can convey to City Council, but in terms of this board's ability to either respond to it or, to react to it, you're limited in your duties pursuant to the revised code.
Okay. The question that has been posed in the chat window just a few minutes ago, and this was something that was brought up a few minutes ago, and that is the suggestion that there is another parcel on 4th Street that separates the Mulberry condos from 4th Street itself. And so in order to maintain contiguousness, I'm interpreting here. I'll just read the comments, probably what I should do. That per auditor's website and its red lines, Mulberry condos are a separate parcel from 4th Street. My interpretation being that Mulberry condos were not required in order to maintain the contiguousness of the district. Again, I think that's a question that needs to be perhaps presented to council. It's not really something we can address in this discussion, in the deliberations of this board, as I understand them. So let me thank you, Mr. Underwood. We appreciate your time. Did you have any final comments to wrap up before I move on to our next objector?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
We appreciate your coming to speak with us. I'm hoping that you'll get answers to at least some of your questions, and we appreciate your time. I do not believe the next objector on my list is present. I don't see him in the list. I believe it's him. The name I have here is Anil Das.
No,
Is there an Anil Das?
do not have Mr. Das.
All right. I have then, I believe is Mr. and Mrs. Giraldo.
We do not list Mr. or Miss nor Mrs. Giraldo.
Okay. Ms. Cronk, I believe. And I see James Cronk as well.
I'm going to take a step back, sir, because we have someone listed as HG. We can check and see if they are the Giraldos.
Thank you.
One moment, please. Okay, thank you for your patience. We will move forward with Mr. or Mrs. Cronk.
Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Kronk, are you on the line?
Can you hear us?
Okay. Were you both planning to speak?
I think I can speak on behalf of my husband. I realize this may be redundant. However, I think the biggest question here is my understanding is that if we're not along the spine of 4th, which we are not, that it would be voluntary to join the SID. And I heard Mr. Wagenbrenner say, well, 25 Mulberry or 25 Jeffrey Park is definitely facing or on 4th. I would like to see a map showing that, because our understanding is that we are not, absolutely not anywhere on 4th. And so therefore our participation should be voluntary. That's all I have to say.
Okay. And again, I think that's a matter that this board can not really address, because that has to do with the constitution of the SID, not the assessment of individual property owners who are currently included in the SID district.
Yeah, but that's not my understanding of how the SID works. He wasn't saying that people not on 4th Street were voluntary. They drew this line around all these parcels so that 60% of the frontage would be owned by people they would know would be amenable to this. That's how it works. That's how the law works. So it's not that people not fronting 4th would have to be voluntary. You are the 40% minority that are getting this put on you by the 60% owner majority, just like he was mentioning the example with the sidewalks. You're subject to this majority because that's how it's laid out in the law. It's not that you had to volunteer for it.
Mr. Adair, this is Jim Kronk. I appreciate you saying that. And that's the first time that we've heard tonight that we're in the 40% minority. So back to Mr. Paul, we understand the position that we're in, at least my wife and I. And as much as Gary said in a nice way that, we do want to support something that's going to improve the community, we just wish that someone had shared that with us prior to receiving a letter in the mail this summer. Back to you, Mr. Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kronk. And I can identify with that. I think we all can. I guess I'm a little unclear too on the notification of individual condo owners. That may be, again, a fact connected to the fact that it is a condo property and that the parcel that was being incorporated is the underlying land. I'm a little unclear on that, but just setting all that aside, I can appreciate that you were a little tweaked. I think that might be one way to put it, when you got this letter and that it took you a bit by surprise. So let me, this again, the letters from most of the objectors, the majority of the objectors are in this particular condo association, this particular condo project, 25 Jeffrey, and it looks like, again, all the letters are, almost all the letters are the same. Was there anything else, Mr. or Ms. Kronk, that you felt was unique about your situation that perhaps your neighbors wouldn't be expressing for you?
Not to my knowledge at this point, Mr. Paul.
Okay, thank you. So let me go ahead and call on the next objector. We established that the Giraldos are not here. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is Mr. Mata here? M-O-T-T-A.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was the one that was originally contacted as a member of the HOA for 25 Jeffrey Park earlier this year. I believe it was February or March, and I spoke with Betsy and basically told her I'd reach out to the other members, see how they felt, and they generally just didn't feel like, what was being offered at this time would be okay for us. So our initial perception was that we wouldn't be included, and I think that's what sort of echoing the sentiments of the other neighbors, Gary, Larissa, and Becky and Jim, was that we were caught off guard, and I think that's the thing that was, as you mentioned, they're not able to discuss here is how exactly the parcels were drawn. But what it seemed like to us at first, after we initially, didn't reply to be or volunteer to be in it, was that when we got the letter, we were surprised that we were included, but that it seemed that the lines were drawn. And we've learned this in this meeting that, Mr. Wagenbender says that he didn't really draw the line. So, our initial perception was that why does the line drop off at 6th when all of his condos are right there next to us, and we have to, pay this assessment, which is to be, improve the economic welfare of the area, but all the ones that are across the street aren't included. And that was, and I know I'm echoing the same sentiments, but, I guess from here on out, I guess our main question is, who do we contact now? I mean, city council is what I think you're saying, is that we have to discuss with them on, I don't really know what to do. I mean, ask for exclusion. I mean, I don't think we're totally opposed, all of us. I mean, we're 25 members, individual condo ownership, but we were caught off guard and we felt like we weren't included in any of the initial setup, and so I think that's why many of our neighbors are upset. It's not that the fees are overwhelming, but as mentioned earlier, we were caught off guard after I initially spoke with Betsy. And never gave her confirmation that we want to be part of it. So that's where we're definitely, it felt like it was sprung on us.
Chair Paul, I think just given that comment is Mr. Mata, thank you so much for your comments. You were one of the people who worked with Betsy in the initial period. I see Betsy's in the chat, and she may have a modification proposal, which I think is really going to be important to us moving forward. So I don't know, Angie, if you can unmute Betsy and allow her to respond now, if that's okay.
Been unmuted. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You are. Please proceed.
Thank you. I want to first thank all of you for allowing me the opportunity to get my baby to bed. I appreciate that very much. I'm sorry I had to dip out for just a second. So I am playing a little bit of catch up here. It's David, isn't it? I know they're calling you Mr. Mata, but I think your first name
Correct.
is David.
That's correct.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
So, there's first of all, I just have to say, I'm so sorry that there wasn't a feedback loop made after that initial conversation to gauge interest in participating in the petitioning effort. Part of that is the city's process is the burden is on the city to provide that information, and candidly, the mechanism that the city has to do that is through city council's agendas. I know from time to time your condo association has folks that participate in the Italian Village Society meetings, and that's where the bulk of sort of the community feedback was done. But with the pandemic and heading out on maternity leave myself, I think there wasn't an opportunity to get you sort of that feedback loop that you may have wanted. But the process is required was followed, and here we are today. And I think, a really good solution for this particular group, and that's what Mark Lundeen had asked for us to present and come to you with, would be one that does address your concern over the duplication issue, that as an HOA, you do participate and you have those fees, and could there be a good workable solution to, provide some reduction in that assessment? And I think it's appropriate for this committee to determine what you feel is the amount of that overall reduction. What we had come up with as a good solution, particularly for your situation, and if there are others in your situation, is, when you do have an HOA and you do, per the condo declaration documents, declare that there's ways in which you're going to use those funds, and if there's duplication of how those funds would be provided as SID services, then for those condos that are included within the SID boundary area, reduce that assessment by some amount, and just not provide those types of services for condos who have already got that accommodation made. So, is 50% the right number? I don't know, is more or less. I think I kind of look to the expertise of this board to help guide that, but I think, a very good solution would be just that. Because it is the case that there would be some benefit certainly to your property by, the art projects and community events and other things that Fred, when you attended our public meeting and we spoke about and you had interest in, that there is benefit there, but is it that it makes sense to reduce the assessment by some amount because of the concerns that you've raised? I think that is the case. So, I think this board, we would really look to your expertise to help guide what that reduction could be in that circumstance.
Betsy, given the fact that the board met and you were aware of some of this objection, has the board discussed being amenable to voting on that reduction? I mean, we certainly can make that recommendation, but I'm wondering if there's been any discussion of that yet.
Well, they're waiting for guidance from you, right? So, and the outcome of this meeting before there can be any vote, and ultimately City Council has to, has to take that action too. So I would say, you guys need to make your recommendation, and certainly that feedback is going to be instrumental in what the final assessment would be, and inform it.
Thank you, Autumn. Let me go ahead and turn to our city attorney for a moment and ask if this board was to make a recommendation that property owners who are being assessed by their condominium association, their HOA, a fee for certain services that perhaps duplicate what the SID would do, would receive a reduction. That would need to apply to all similarly situated, not just those who specifically appeared before this board to object. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, actually, those individuals who filed an objection are the individuals that are before the board that you would make a determination. There is a provision allowing for the board to equalize, and I believe you could make a recommendation to council that they consider something beyond that, but you're only specifically obligated to rule on the objections that have been filed.
Okay. And therefore, with regard to specific parcels, not to a class of...
Yes, that is correct. And I think that what you do is make a recommendation as to specific parcels who have filed an objection. You can also make then a generalized recommendation that council consider other parcels similarly situated, and then council would make the determination as to whether or not they chose to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering, Mark or Chair Paul, is there a business owner objector here tonight?
I believe there is, and that's a different scenario, I suspect, in terms of their objections, and maybe we can go ahead and move him up in the agenda. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think so. I think it'll help kind of make some thoughts around responding to Betsy's modification. Residential annualized amount that Caitlin shared was about $200, and the commercial amount is significantly higher at $1,500. So I think it might be helpful to hear from a commercial objector.
I understand, and so I think we'll dispense with the alphabetic list at this point and just go completely out of order. And appreciate, I don't think, I think we determined Mr. Patel is not here. Mr. Robinson, Mr. Underwood, we've heard from. I'm just trying to determine who we're asking to hold on at this point. Let's go ahead and ask Kevin Nosner, who was here earlier, and I'm hoping he still is.
I am indeed.
Okay, to go ahead and...
Chair?
I'm sorry?
Mr. Chair, I would say Mr. Patel is on the line as well.
Ah, okay.
I'm not saying you need to take him back, but he is here.
Okay. I wonder if Mr. Patel then would indulge us as we hear from Mr. Nosner and then come back to Mr. Patel per Ms. Glover's suggestion. Mr. Patel, are you there?
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Dr. Patel. Everyone else has already been very eloquent about speaking, and I don't have anything additional to offer. I would just mention, in case it's not very clear, that we already do pay a Jeffrey Park assessment fee for the building and the quality improvement of the area. This was charged to us from the beginning of our residence here in March of 2017, my residence anyway. So I just want to make that clear in case it isn't already. But other than that, everyone else has definitely spoken my part. I'm done. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you. And your letter, again, was, I think, thorough, and unless you want to add to it, we appreciate your brevity tonight. And we'll come back then to the question, I think, of those of you who are similarly situated, and at this point, turn to Mr. Nosner, who has a somewhat different situation, as I understand it, and ask him to explain that to us.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. So as you mentioned, my situation is a little bit different. I have 2 commercial properties along the SID, one on 4th Street and one on 5th Avenue. And I had a kind of a similar situation where the first communication I got regarding this was after the city council adopted the resolution. So it was the certified letter in July when I found out about it, and it just basically gave me my 2 assessments. So I think people have very eloquently explained how that can be a kind of a surprise. So I've since learned a lot more about the SID. We had a good meeting mid-September with Betsy and Caitlin, and they've been very helpful explaining the benefits of it. And I do think there definitely are a lot of benefits. However, housing 2 small businesses, one being a local pizza shop, another one being a local hookah cafe. These guys are struggling at this time. As you know, we've had some other local small businesses already close up shop in this district. And so I just think the timing of it is a bit tone deaf, and I understand like the ball was rolling and it was hard to stop. If I was king of the world, I would push this off 1 year, honestly, because I think we're going into a very difficult season as it gets colder, and a lot of these businesses are going to struggle with all the COVID restrictions. So that's really my 2 cents. I did have other objections, and those since have been explained a little bit better. So those I would probably, retract, or now that I understand it a lot better, I'm good with that. But I do think the timing of this is really tough on the small businesses there, and I think what makes Italian Village unique is these local homegrown type spots, and we have enough chains, so I really don't want to lose any more, which so I know that it's not a huge amount of money, but just every little bit helps right now, and I know it'll help them in the future once everything's enacted and the SID is up and running. But the timing of the cost of it is poor, in my opinion.
I appreciate your comments. Let me just ask you, you indicated you did not receive any communication prior to the notice of the special assessment, which was sent out at the end of June. Is that right?
Correct.
And in this case, you didn't have the complication of being a condominium property and so forth. You own these properties and you are the owner of record. Is that right?
Correct.
So again, I'm curious if the SID staff, the organizers, can speak at all to when Mr. Nosner should have received notification, and in fact, should he have had an opportunity to be included in that petition, or to not sign the petition. Apparently, he wasn't asked whether he wanted to sign the petition. And again, we might need to unmute.
Betsy said she has a response.
Okay. Yes, please, Betsy, if you would do so. And if we can unmute Betsy.
So there were, oh shoot.
We can hear you.
Okay. There were a couple attempts to reach out to Kevin prior to the submission of any petitions, and unfortunately, I just don't think we had good contact information that those messages made it to him. Their majority, I believe, of the commercial properties were received a phone call or some form of engagement saying, is there interest? So, again, it's sometimes hard to get that information, but the nature of Kevin's concerns, though, are important concerns, and there are certainly ones that we're very mindful of. And again, I can't speak to, the entirety of things happening in an area prior to the establishment of a SID, but just drawing comparisons to the business community on High Street in the Short North, that community is incredibly thankful to have a resource like a SID during the pandemic and then thinking about after the pandemic. Thinking about all of the new needs that are going to emerge as a result of this in terms of economic development. One area where, because of SID resources, we were able to mobilize on High Street was creating a program called the Gift Card Give Back, where we were able to leverage donations from the corporate community that was being successful to then allow small businesses to get cash prior to the creation of any local grant programs, prior to there being any federal programs that came through to start supporting them. So that's just one example of the type of creative idea that can emerge because of those SID resources. And we're hopeful that because of the establishment of it, there's a better chance for businesses to be successful in light of the pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Pandora, for responding. And again, thank you, Mr. Nosner, for speaking with us. Anything else that you wanted to say before we move on?
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, and then I think the only property owners that we haven't heard from as yet are Robinson and Smolsky and Gabbert. Are either of those folks here?
They are not listed in the attendee list, sir.
Okay. All right. So at this point, I think, board members, I think we are at the point of deciding what we've heard, discussing what we've heard, deciding what we think we can or should do about it, or what we should recommend that council do about it. Are there any other comments before we actually move to that phase of our meeting from my colleagues?
Yeah, I have a question. Wouldn't it be easier, or is it possible, I think maybe for Dave Mata, for the HOA to change its fee to reduce that and kind of to compensate for this new assessment? If you feel like you're going to be paying too much and you're going to receive the service from the SID, why can't you just change your HOA and reduce that, or reduce your condo fee?
Mr. Mata, you're recognized if you'd like to respond.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I was just waiting for the mute button to be unmuted. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's no, certainly I understand your question, but why can't you guys just lower your fees? We already have our fees. I mean, what kind of we have our fees as low as we can have them to have the services that we have. We can't guarantee, we have no oversight as to what the 54 SID board, since I know that's an elected board that decides what happens and what gets, who gets what services, and who needs what services. But, we set our fees as low as possible, and we're able to go out and, have those bids contested by different landscapers or whatnot. We can do those searches, of course, but we have full control over that arena. Whereas, you guys would say, well, this is what we're going to do. And if we're unhappy, we don't really have much control over what goes on after that. Only the board controls those fees. So, we have our fees as low as possible is the short answer. And, but the easy answer I just say is, well, you guys just lower your fees for our neighborhood, and maybe we can talk about other services that you guys can provide, like the economic welfare of the neighborhood. But for you guys to just say, oh, why don't you just lower your fees? Well, why don't you guys lower your fees? I mean, it's not a good argument.
Well, it's just a question, and we're a neutral. We don't care. We don't care about the SID. We're not part of that. So the 3 members of this board are totally neutral.
Okay.
I did want to know,
the short answer is our fees are as low as we can keep them, and that's one of the reasons we initially were hesitant about joining and volunteering, is that we just didn't want to add extra fees to our own.
do you have a specific example of the duplication of services? When we initially got brought into this, you're claiming that you're going to be paying for services that you're already receiving. What is your claim that the SID is going to charge you for doing something that you're already paying for? Like, what is the exact specific example?
I don't know. I would have to read through everything that the SID provides. I mean, I know their goal is to provide the economic welfare, but if I remember from my conversations with Betsy, it was, we can clean up the area from like graffiti or pick up trash or, general improvement of our area. We don't have much land where we live. It's almost all blocked in by our condos. It's a private pavement area. So picking up trash doesn't directly benefit our specific neighborhood. I mean, we only have, most of us have 5 foot by 10 foot area between us and the street, and that's technically city property. I mean, our HOA pays for the landscaping there. I'd have to go back and look at everything that my HOA pays for. I mean, our property manager isn't on the phone right now. He's the one that does those types of deals for us. But I would have to go look at down the line. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Mata. I think Betsy is prepared. She put a comment in the chat that said the plan or services of the SID outlines exactly the types of services that could be offered. Presentation that they went through, we estimate about 50% of the types of services that could be offered might possibly be duplicated by the HOA. So that's her estimate of duplication. I just have a couple questions that maybe
thank you, Betsy.
Mark can answer. Thank you, Mr. Mata. After the authorization period in 2025, what happens to the SID? That's my first question. And then my second question is, typically the city appointment, so that's the last seat of influence on this established board, is that a city employee, or are there cases where the city could appoint a community member?
Thanks for the question, Autumn. As far as after 2025, the city would just end, or if there's a renewal of the SID, they would need to petition again and get 60% of the ownership to renew the SID. So we had several of those that went through this year. We're just renewing the SID. So in effectively 5 years, the property owners to choose again. Regarding the city seat, to my knowledge, it has always been a city employee. I don't know. I'd have to look at Laura to see if it was possible to appoint someone who is not a city employee. Traditionally, the roles have been filled by a city employee.
Mark, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing you. I could hear you say my name, but I couldn't hear the question.
The seat filled by the public, it's always been a city employee, but does it have to be?
So it depends on the specific bylaws for the SID board. If the SID board bylaws simply say that it's selected by the cities, then it could be anybody that the city chooses. If the SID bylaws require that it be an employee of the city of Columbus, then it would have to be an employee. I'd have to see the bylaws. Most of the ones I've seen, though, are an appointment by the city, which means the city could appoint whoever they choose to represent them. They would mean that would be a city representative. So they would have to still represent the interests of the city if they were appointed, if that's how it was described in the bylaws.
Thank you.
So, let's see, let me turn the volume down a little bit. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to ask my colleagues, do they feel they have let's again agree we are dealing with, in a sense, two classes of objectors here. The folks who represent condominium properties, and specifically in the 25 Jeffrey community, all I think have pretty much the same objection, the same, are they seeking the similar solution? Mr. Nosner has a different situation, and potentially a different solution would be appropriate for him. So do you agree we should be talking really about those two classes of objectors at this point?
I would agree. Are there, I can't recall, I'm trying to scan through the objectors. Are there any other residential objectors that are not a member of the HOA that Mr. Mata is a part of? No? Thank you, Lara.
I think the Galleon was the other one. The first group that came on was from the Galleon, right next to
Okay,
25.
you're right. Thank you.
So the other question then that we should address first is, do my colleagues feel like we should and have the ability to propose a solution for that particular group of objectors tonight? Or do you want to take this up in a subsequent discussion?
Can someone mute all the attendees? Because there's a really awful noise.
Yeah. There we go.
All attendees are muted.
Thank you. The commercial objection doesn't seem like we have authority. I mean, the objection was that it's the bad timing. That's not something that the Equalization Board is empowered to consider.
We could, though, propose, Matt, that the fee be reduced or modified for a period of time, which I think would be fair. Lara, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, you do have the authority. Again, the three things that you can do are you can determine whether or not the amount of the assessment in the entirety. You can take a look at the apportionment of that assessment among the different properties, or you can talk about what the assessment that has specifically been levied against a particular property. So within that last category, you can make that consideration. The other two would be more about equalizing amongst properties.
But does the law give reasons why you can adjust the amount? Is COVID a reason to reduce the amount of an assessment?
Interestingly enough, the revised code does not specifically give this board any criteria to determine whether or not it would be appropriate. You're supposed to instead consider it against the standards that were in the resolution that was passed. So it says you shall equalize it to conform to the standards in the resolution that was passed.
I guess my comment to that, Matt, would be that we have the SID, represented by Mark and Betsy and Caitlin this evening, who are willing to enter into a fee modification. I don't know that we have to make a comment on the why. So I don't know that I would say we would make a recommendation to council based on COVID-19 impacts. I think we would say based on the interest of the SID to come to a resolution with the objecting property owners, we're recommending a reduction in the fee for a period of time. That would be my thinking, just because we know based on tonight's discussion that both sides are, I think, willing to accept the modification.
I sort of understand where Matt is coming from, also where Autumn is coming from. I tend to do some work with the community zoning commission and the Northland Community Council Development Committee. We hear a lot of variance. And the one thing that we're trying to establish there is that a given property owner has an unusual, somewhat unique situation within a district that would require that they receive some kind of consideration they would not otherwise receive, some kind of adjustment in the requirements of the code. I can see here, I think we are perhaps already in agreement that the condominium owners have established that their situation is perhaps different than other kinds of property owners in that they're already paying an assessment to their condo association to provide certain services. I'm not sure, and this is, I think, what Matt's point is, that anyone can say that they are uniquely affected by COVID. We're all being affected by COVID. All property owners are who are all businesses along the corridor are potentially being affected by it and so forth. I'm not sure that we could use that as a basis to adjust an assessment saying that that was a unique aspect of Mr. Nosner's properties. Are you making that point, Matt, or am I going too far with your point?
You made it way better than I did.
Yeah, I don't think that, but I think, and Lara helped me think about this. I mean, I heard Mark and Betsy say that they're willing to resolve with a modification to the cost. I also heard Mr. Nosner say it's bad timing, but he would be amenable to contributing to this. So I don't think that, he used COVID as an example of why businesses are struggling in our community, which is the reality. But I don't think that that is our justification. I think it's more about just preparation. I mean, the commercial properties have a significantly higher assessment, which I do think we can weigh in on. But Betsy is saying that isn't the case. I wrote down $1,500 annualized for the commercial properties. That's significantly higher than $200.
She might have been responding to something else.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And she has just volunteered to explain the commercial, so that's be happy to do that.
Yeah, please do. And you can unmute Betsy.
Trying to unmute me.
She's unmuted.
Welcome back, Betsy.
Autumn, the.
Okay, Matt.
Okay, now start. It keeps going back and forth.
Keeps muting herself. I'm going to unmute you, Betsy. One moment. Okay, Betsy, you are unmuted.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You are.
Okay. So the assessment formula is based on a certain dollar amount per square foot, and that is indiscriminate across all properties. It's the case that these condo properties pay a much lower amount because they have a much lesser amount of square footage and stake. The dollar amount that we quoted for Kevin's properties is the sum of his properties. So it's based fairly on the amount of square footage that one occupies within the given area. I think what's unique about this particular circumstance with the homeowners association is that they are already collecting something and then providing what could be a similar service, and therefore, I think there's a real opportunity there to address that concern with a reduction, whereas it's specific to the folks that have that HOA and where there is the potential for that duplication. On the commercial side, there isn't that potential.
Thank you. And you estimated that at 50% for the residential properties. So we could
if you take
recommendation of, reducing their assessment at 50%.
That's just a suggestion. If you take a look at the plan of services, about half of it addresses what those types of HOA potentially provided services are without having examined individual HOA programs. I couldn't say for certain, but that seems to be a good ballpark estimate.
Thanks.
So is there a proposal that the SID has prepared for these specific objectors to reduce their individual assessments? I'm confused. Would we be able to vote on that? I'm confused.
As I understood the comments that were made earlier, I think it was by Ms. Pandora.
They're waiting for us to make that.
They were waiting for us to make a recommendation. They are have made that suggestion, but they have not drafted anything formally to be voted on to make that adjustment until we make a recommendation. I think you're muted, Autumn.
Sorry. The only thing that was included, that's such a COVID moment, right? The only thing that was included in their document was that they would be amenable to a potential resolution for the residential condo associations. But they also noted that there are other precedents of condos locally included in a SID that contribute fully. So it's up to us to recommend what we think they should do. I appreciate Betsy commenting in the chat that there was, no thanks, Betsy, I think we're supposed to do that. But I do appreciate her response to Mr. Mata, which is that the duplication is estimate of 50%, which I think is generous estimate. And I'm pretty sure she testified to be honest about that based on her estimate. I mean, it's not precise. So, you know, me personally, I would put forward to my colleagues on the board that we recommend the council that they reduce the assessment for the condo association at 50% of what was originally assessed.
Now, let me go back to my earlier question, and that is we are able to make recommendations concerning the specific parcels that have been represented here tonight. We can also suggest to council that they consider something else, but that's separate from our recommendations on the cases that have been brought to us here tonight.
That's
Sure,
correct. I'm sorry. It's
Go
like
ahead.
when you get assessed your tax property assessment, and individuals file a specific, objection to that, and those are the ones that can be considered. But if, in observing that the legislative body feels that, hey, maybe there was a group of individuals that are improperly assessed, they could then consider that. So like I said, what's before you are the people who have specifically filed an objection. And you can say to council in, passing on your recommendations, hey, we want you to know there might be other similarly situated entities, but I don't know that they are before you, but council can then take a look at that.
Okay. And then my other question is maybe a little out of order, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And that is, if council doesn't perhaps take that broader suggestion, clearly, again, I think we understand the property owners who've come to speak to us tonight. We can recommend that they receive an adjustment in their assessment. That isn't automatically going to benefit other property owners who are similarly situated unless council chooses to do so. Are we potentially establishing a precedent that we would need to basically have all of those property owners not here tonight come and speak to a board of equalization and seek exactly the same accommodation that these property owners have received? And maybe that's the way it needs to work.
That's the way that the statute is written. It's not whether or not they appear here necessarily, they just have to file the objection. But if individuals have not filed their objection within the time period that was allowed for law, they've already waived it. So as I said, you can communicate to council that you've noticed something, and council can decide if they choose to do something about that or not within their discretion. But in terms of the rights to actually file an objection and have that objection heard, if they haven't filed it by now, they've missed out on their time frame, and they would not be able to file an objection at this point.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so I think that at least one of us who are charged with coming up with some solution here have a proposal to recommend, and so Ms. Glover, did you want to make a motion? I guess we should go that way.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate all the thought that's gone into this. I think none of the objectors or the proposers disagree that, SIDs have incredible value for our communities. And I think, to anyone that's been in Columbus for a long period of time, particularly over the last 20 years, know that the Short North SID has created incredible value. And so it only makes sense that as that area continues to evolve, that we continue to think about tools like this. I think a SID is a great tool. With that being said, I certainly understand that, and Betsy and those who have been involved in Short North knew how to approach applying for a SID. I mean, they admittedly shared that this process started about 10 months ago, which is longer than when the first notification letter went out. And so they fulfilled a statute where they approached 60% of the relevant property owners and did the legal work to get this prepared. And I think nobody is, discounting the labor that it took to get there. I think the challenge that I sympathize with for the residential property owners is that they first heard of it in March, and they probably would have wanted to contribute to the thinking around that. Hopefully it's clear tonight that, Mark and Betsy and Caitlin don't really control a lot of where the lines are and all that kind of stuff. So I feel pretty comfortable that we've resolved the who's included and not included portion. What I do think is a point for us to make a recommendation to City Council on is that we know that there is some duplication of these services, and the property owners have expressed clearly that they view that as a duplication that, they want us to consider. And with that being said, I do think it would be fair to recommend to council that, especially now, I mean, this SID is authorized for 5 years. And so, in 5 years, they may see the value and want to increase their contribution. But today, there's a lot of angst that I think we should honor for these residents and make a recommendation to council that their assessment is reduced initially. And I'm open to entertaining a with both of you, a time frame for that. But I think if we know there's duplication very clearly, that would be a good recommendation.
I must be more of a curmudgeon. I mean, I asked what specific services would be duplicated, and he couldn't name one.
Yeah,
So
but Betsy did comment that as a proposer. So again, I'm with you, Matt. If Betsy wouldn't have, and no shade, Betsy, that you volunteered that information, but I think it's fair that the proposer is saying we're willing to modify, and she kind of conceded to there could potentially be duplication.
Yeah, she was kind of saying that potentially half of the things the SID might do,
right,
an existing HOA also might be doing.
Right.
I think would be weird if these people that live at 25 Jeffrey ran into their neighbor that lives in a condo along 4th Street that is in it. And it's like, well, why is the person on 4th Street paying into this thing that's cleaning our sidewalks and picking up our trash and, added trash cans and it's beautifying the neighborhood, but the person that lives behind you isn't paying anything at all? That seems kind of odd. Why you get an exception just because you're a squeaky wheel? I mean, I don't really agree with that at all. You're benefiting from neighborhood-wide services. There's going to be public art. There's going to be all these advocacy campaigns. I mean, who knows what they're going to do? And you're going to benefit from it. And you want to be an exception to that. I don't think that's the individual above the collective good. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Let me just play the devil's advocate too here and say, if I understand correctly, these objectors, and I guess I'm thinking primarily of the folks, I'm thinking of all the objectors, do have the ability now that they're aware of the SID, they're aware that it exists, they're aware of the proposals in terms of services and so forth, but that has not been completely finalized. The menu of services that is going to be provided is something they actually have some influence over. And if the condominium owners feel that the SID should concentrate on things they don't receive from their condominium association, perhaps they also have an opportunity to influence what the SID would provide. Is that
Where
accurate?
would that influence come from, Dave?
From their addressing the SID board, they're participating in the process the SID board makes available to the tenants of the SID, that is those who are within the SID district, to discuss the services the SID should provide. I'm presuming that's part of their process of making that decision in terms of what services the SID will actually provide specifically.
I don't really imagine that. I mean, the SID's has a board. The board's going to decide what they want to do, and then the staff are going to be doing their programs. I don't know that. I mean, sure, the owners are going to get the opportunity to inform services, but it's not like this condo association is going to have a voting seat or something. It's going to be probably more general engagement of neighbors.
Well, it'd be along the lines of addressing our city council to influence
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Certainly.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason, Dave, why I asked about the appointment and who's on the board. Because, to be completely honest with you, if you're not voting on the board, that I understand that would give me kind of a lack of faith, because they can consider my opinion, but they may not act in it. I definitely hear your point earlier, Matt, about kind of good. But if the SID, and it's just to be determined, we don't know. But there seems to be a little bit of, there's just a lack of clarity on who's on the board, how the board was formed, what the bylaws are, to kind of really, from my perspective, understand the ability to influence. I really do understand the frustration. Like, if the HOA believes that the menu of items, even if they can't name them off, I don't expect a homeowner to come with a script. But if looking at that menu feels like duplication to what they're paying for, and they're in agreement about that, I hear that pretty clearly, and it means something to me in this consideration. Betsy put in the chat that the Italian Village Society has a rep. I'm not sure of the relationship between the society and the HOAs. Yeah, I understand what it is. I didn't hear anybody in the HOA mention a relationship to the Italian Village Society. And I heard mostly the SID reps say that they presented, that's where primarily that discussion was happening. But then we hear HOA members saying they weren't aware of these meetings. So it's hard. Community engagement is difficult always, let alone during the public health crisis. So I'm not, slighting anyone for lack of communication, but if they believe that there is duplication and a resolution is to reduce, at least for some period of time or at some level, and they can come to that agreement, which I feel like I've heard that they would come to that agreement, but maybe I'm interpreting my thoughts. So
Laura, we can vote on, we can hear objectives on three things, right? So I think it would be, number one, the amount. The people are claiming the amount is too high based on their private services that they've agreed to previously. So it seems like we would be able to suggest a lower amount if we think it's appropriate. I don't personally, because this is a community-wide service. It's a benefit, like somebody mentioned. How is picking up trash across the street going to benefit them? Well, of course it is. You walk your dog and you take walks and you see the neighborhood, and what do you mean it's not going to benefit you just because it's not within your parcel line? I mean, that's really weird and really short-sighted for you to think that lifting up the community is not going to benefit you. So it seems to me there's not a valid argument that they wouldn't benefit from these services. These are community-wide services. They're not stopping at anybody's parcel lines necessarily, and you're going to get the services because you're in the parcel line. So I don't see how there's any valid objection here. They're complaining about not having been informed.
Matt, you actually addressed a question to the city attorney. I don't think you gave her a chance to answer, though. The question was, is it the first authorized activity of this board that we should be considering in this case? Is that the one that we could actually act under the authorization to adjust the amount of the assessment? Is that right?
That is something that is within the board's authority. It's the amount of the assessment, the apportionment of the assessment, or whether or not the assessment should be assessed against that particular.
Okay. I'm sorry, Matt. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Post question. We're giving really a chance to address me. Right. Okay. All right. So it sounds like we're at the point where we, again, should make, to avoid sort of going in circles all night, we should make some sort of proposal at this point, and I think vote on that proposal. And if that, now we don't have enough members that we're likely to be in limbo on that. On the other hand, if we defeat the motion, then we start again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds, Matt, you don't agree with, I don't think, and you tell me, with my proposal of reducing the residential amount. Do you have a counter proposal?
No action. Is that like just let it go forward as it is? But we don't. But it's a 2 out of 3 vote, so we don't have to agree. Yeah, I think the whole thing's fine. I think it's how they followed the statute. I mean, that's what the Ohio Revised Code says. If these citizens want to go to the State House and ask for that to change, that's totally fine. Go do that.
Okay. Dave, do you have a thought?
Say that again.
Do you have a thought? Is there any amount change in your mind?
I think I'm in agreement with you at this point that this particular group of residents, property owners, have demonstrated that they have a unique situation that perhaps wasn't contemplated when the SID was created, and that they are that it is not unreasonable for them to request some adjustment. So you've, I think, already sort of framed a motion. I'm going to actually ask you if you want to go ahead and make that motion.
But is it applying to only these parcels, or is it applying to all HOAs that could have potentially similar services?
I tried to clarify that earlier.
We can only propose to the objectors, right? Or Lara, please, that's if you want to.
The specific recommendation coming from the board would be from the individuals who have filed an objection. And as I said, if you want to communicate to council that there's a concern out there, generally you can do that, but only within your authority is to make a specific recommendation as to those individuals who have filed an objection. The others have waived their objection.
And as a point of clarification, it could potentially include even those who have not appeared before us tonight. They've filed an objection by sending a letter to the city clerk. So they don't have to have spoken tonight. If we believe they are entitled to the same compensation or adjustment that others who have spoken tonight are entitled to, then we can make that recommendation as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. They have filed an objection. They have stated in their objection the reason that they believe that they're entitled to an equalization. If you feel that the information they provided to you in written format is sufficient, then you may consider it. If you feel that by not participating here this evening, you have questions that remain unanswered, then you can indicate that it wasn't sufficient for you to consider.
Okay.
So I guess I would say, my recommendation is that we consider an adjustment to the amount for those who have submitted an objection. And I'm open to discussion, Matt and Dave, on what that amount is, but keeping in mind that I think the primary purpose is potential duplication. I don't disagree, Matt, that there's community benefit, but at the same time, I think they've sufficiently objected, and that amount doesn't have to be 50% of reduction. I think both parties are willing to accept this modification. I mean, the SID put it in writing that they were willing to do that modification. A lot of this is to be determined on what the services will be and what those costs are. But what we know today is that both parties are willing to accept an adjustment.
Ms. Pandora has something else she wants us to be aware of, I think, if we could unmute her.
Or if she can type fast.
Yes, her comment was one thing to note that is of concern to these
but
folks.
this may be a more efficient thing to do if you can hear me.
Yes.
So I don't want to. I just wanted to raise an issue just based on the nature of how the motion was going. And the city attorney may also need to provide clarity on this. The individual owners that submitted letters, they are you may be making a recommendation for all of the objectors, but keep in mind, some of these objectors have friends and neighbors that are a part of the same HOA that didn't submit a letter to you, right, and are technically separate tax parcels. So probably the fairer thing to do would be to make sure that they're not pitted against their friends and neighbors where one person across the hall is paying and the other person isn't paying, that you consider something that is about HOAs like this within the SID boundary.
However, if I understood our city attorney's advice, we can't do that other than make a recommendation. Yes, we could say we're not going to make any adjustments tonight to any of these property owners' assessments, but we'll pass the suggestion along to city council. I guess that is an option. However, that would purely be a suggestion. I'm sorry, go ahead.
That I have not improperly stated that, just to make absolutely sure. The board determines to
And again, if the nature of what you have to act on tonight is very specific to these parcels, but you have the ability to then make a recommendation that broadens it to address the concern that I'm pointing out to you, I just wanted to raise that and make sure you had awareness of it.
Thank you. That's a good point.
It says that the board shall, at such meeting, any adjournment thereof, hear and determine all objections to the estimated which have been filed, and shall equalize such estimated assessments as it thinks proper to conform to the standards prescribed in the resolution adopted by council. If the board determines to increase the estimated assessment against any lot or parcel of land, or to assess any lot or parcel of land not included in the estimated assessment, and the owner of such lot did not file an objection, then they shall notify them. What it does not allow the board to do, interestingly enough, is to decrease the assessment against individuals who have not filed an objection. And those individuals, if they did not file timely, have waived their objection.
Right. So my motion is still correct. I'm willing to say that we add a note to council to consider applying it to the full HOA, whatever it is, to the HOA, but that's council discretion based on the statute. I mean, we can only comment on who submitted the objection and the, due process time, but definitely appreciate the thought that somebody didn't file an objection and they could be across the street, but I don't think that we can make a decision there. With that being said, I think Dave and I agree that we're comfortable with recommending an adjustment to those residential objectors. I guess our discussion now needs to be at what percentage are we recommending or amount?
So I hate to add to the confusion. Are we saying the HOA of 25 Jeffrey, the HOA of Galleon, right? I mean, all of
No, it's only the objectors.
Only the objectors can we rule on, Mark. So only people who filed an objection. So
that's not possible.
Recommendation.
Because the fee is levied by parcel, not by condo parcel, right?
Right, but they're individual tax parcels. The condos are individual tax parcels.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can only comment on those who filed an objection. So with that,
which is what makes this even more unfair. That's why
we can add a note, Matt, to council that they should consider whatever adjustment we recommend for those who met the process. And I suggest that we do, who met the process, that council consider that to apply to the others in the in similar position, however you want to word it. But the statute says who filed the objection is who we're able to adjust it for.
Well, it'll be interesting considering Dave and Larissa are complaining that their neighbors won't be paying into this, but they are. But now they're not going to be paying into it, and their neighbors in their same condo complex will be paying because they failed to file an objection. That's why that doesn't make sense.
Well, our adjustment doesn't have to be zero, Matt. It could be a percentage. So I guess knowing that Dave and I already agree as a majority on the board to make some adjustment, do you have a recommendation on a percentage or an amount?
Oh, mine would be 100. So I don't know if Dave wants to talk about.
But that's not an option, is what I'm saying. Dave and I agreed. The majority of the board agreed that we would give adjustment. So now that decision has been made as a part of this recommendation, and 100 is not an option. What would you recommend? Are you going to say 99? I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really unfair. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. Okay. I cannot process it.
Okay. Do you have an amount suggestion?
Let me just, in the interest of everyone's time, and we appreciate everyone's time, but let me just go ahead and frame this as a motion, and we'll put it to a vote, and we'll go from there. I'm going to make the motion that in the case of objectors, and I'm going to read them because I am in effect, and Mr. Nosner will come back to you, we're excluding you from this particular motion. With regard to the objectors, Brady and Carr, Brophy, Das, Giraldo, Cronk, Mata, apologies, Patel, Robinson, Smolsky and Gabbard, and Underwood, I make the motion that we recommend to council that their assessment be reduced by 50%. So that's the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Now we can discuss further, or we can just simply put it to a vote if we think we've already talked it to death.
Yeah, I think we've talked it to death. I mean, I think if Matt would have had a different thought, I would have been happy to consider a different percentage, but I think 50%. I guess the only discussion we do need to have is, are we recommending this to council for the entire
I think that conversation should come next. I think we should actually act on the motion as presented first.
Yep. So
again, if another member of the board wants me to consider amending the motion to suggest some other amount, this would be the time to speak. Otherwise, we just put the question to a vote.
It's an arbitrary amount because she said that's not a financial amount. It's half of the services could potentially be overlapped. So
sure.
I'm not going to suggest another percentage because that's arbitrary, and this whole thing is it's even wholly more arbitrary because it really doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Well, let me put the question to a vote. All those of us 3 members of the board who are in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Members who are opposed, same sign.
No.
Nay.
Oh.
Nay? What word is it?
Nay will work. I will take that as an objection. No one is abstaining. So that motion passes. We will make that recommendation to council. The next question, I think, is, do we also recommend to council then that they consider making a proactively, that is without requiring objectors to come forward, making a similar adjustment for the other property owners who are similarly situated? I almost can't say it. And I'm not even sure that would only include the residents or property owners in 25 Jeffrey. I mean, there may be other condominium properties that could be identified that are paying assessments to condominium associations that may have a similar overlap. That's something that council could determine. But I'm editorializing, I guess. Yes.
I would just make sure that you are clear what it is that you're asking that they consider. I think you just hit on it deadly. It's either 25 Jeffrey or it's everybody who has a condo, and that's a much broader group, much bigger group.
It is.
But making it clear.
Maybe I should clarify with also the representatives of the SID. Nate said earlier they would be willing to consider an adjustment. Were they talking only about this very small number of objectors, or were they saying that they would be willing to consider an adjustment to all those similarly situated? I mean, if council decides that's what they'd like to do, I'm not sure that the SID itself.
We would support, I think, Betsy, correct me if I'm wrong, all those similarly situated for sure. I mean, this is just going to lead to more, and so we'd rather just say every condominium association currently in the SID gets that relief. I mean, that would be
Okay. And I'm not laughing at you, by the way. I'm laughing because Betsy is having some typing difficulty, but she just said in the chat window, similarly situated, that's what's fair, with several alternative spellings of fair. Okay. So again, I'll frame the motion if it's okay. I would make the motion that we as a board recommend to City Council that they identify other property owners within the SID district who are similarly situated, that will require some research, and that they consider reducing their assessment by a similar amount. Maybe council doesn't think 50% is the right adjustment. And as you've said, Matt, we are picking a number. We can't necessarily be sure that's the right number to be applied more broadly. That's at the discretion of council, I think. But my motion would be that we propose to council that they identify those parcels similarly situated and consider reducing their assessments by an amount they deem appropriate. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay. So the motion has been made and seconded. Discussion.
They all have separate votes?
I'm sorry?
They all have to be separate votes? Like this is a separate issue, then? Because I thought we were going to have a recommendation to go along with the vote, Laura. We're voting on each separate item?
I think we need to agree on how it's presented. So just for clarity, I think it makes sense to separate it a bit.
The way that I would look at it is that the votes on the individual objectors are a vote to the assessments against those parcels. If you're recommending to council that a whole group of individuals ought not to have been assessed at the amount that they've been assessed, then that's a recommendation from the Assessment Equalization Board as to the entirety of the assessment and how it's apportioned. So it would be a separate consideration that you are putting forth to council to consider to determine whether or not they would take you up on that recommendation if that's the way you want to go. So it would be a separate issue.
And that was my thinking.
So I don't think I can vote for that because I think it would be cognitive dissonance with my original vote then. So I think I'll say no.
Okay.
I mean, that's fine. One of your arguments, though, was that, it wasn't going to be equitably applied. And so now that we've voted majority for the first part, you could also say that.
I mean, I agree that it should be done. I just don't think it makes sense that I vote for it because I disagree with the original.
You can either vote against it or you can abstain.
Oh, let's abstain then. Thank you. I'm not against it. Let's abstain. Thank you.
Let me make sure with our city attorney, because again, rules on who can abstain and why vary. So can he in fact abstain from the decision?
I think since it's just a recommendation to council, I think it's fine.
All right. So the motion has been made. It's been seconded. The motion, I'll restate it as quickly as I can, is that we recommend to council that they identify property owners who are similarly situated to the objectors who've come before us tonight, and consider making some adjustment, to their assessments based on the information that we will have presented to them about these objectors and our feeling that it should be equitable. And that motion, more or less, was seconded. And so let me go ahead and put that to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. And if there are any abstentions, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have one abstention. So that motion passes by a vote of 2 in favor with one abstention. Okay, so Mr. Nosmer has been very patient, and so let's turn our attention to his situation, which again we
Wait one
agree is a
second,
little
Dave.
different.
I don't know
Yes.
that we addressed or if it matters, Lara, but for what time frame we're recommending this adjustment? Is it for the full authorization period, or is it for some shorter time? Lara, do we need to clarify that?
I mean, the assessments themselves have been through for what, a 5-year period of time. So I think it's up to the board how you're, deciding to rule in their objection to the assessment.
I don't know if that matters to you, Matt, or Dave. I just wanted to bring that up. We could, go ahead.
I thought about that earlier. Frankly, I just thought it added another layer of complexity and confusion. The circumstances the objectors have described to us, I think, apply and presumably will apply during the entire period, notwithstanding the fact they may be able to influence the SID perhaps in certain ways, which is what I brought up earlier. But I think it should apply. The adjustment that we are proposing to council that they make should apply during the entire term of the SID, this term of the SID.
Then I don't know if it requires a separate vote then, because that's assumed, right?
It is unless we want to carve it out. So I'm amenable to that, to being the entire period.
I think you're right. I mean, we didn't state otherwise, so I think we can assume by omission that we were suggesting that apply for the entire term of the SID. And again, that as Mark explained earlier, the SID will ultimately go through a renewal process, and at that point, these objectors and others can speak with the petitioners and take a different approach if they like. Okay. Moving along to Mr. Nosner. Again, his situation is a little different. We understood what he was saying. His assessment is higher based on the square footage that his property represents, but I don't think we have as clear-cut a case for how his properties are different than other properties that are being assessed. Autumn, you, I think, did make some points earlier about, well, I won't speak for you. Let me ask you if you want to make any further comments about that.
I don't think the points that I heard from him apply to our purview. To both you and Matt's perspective, it doesn't apply to, there's no way to justify the amount or apportionment. If you guys have thoughts, but I definitely sympathize with the experience of small business owners. But certainly there's not a difference, as you said, with the others in similar positions.
Matt?
He is just saying that the timing's bad. So, yeah, I don't think the SID could have pushed it off if they wanted, but no, I don't think that's under our purview.
Okay. I assume even if our recommendation was, and I will not assume that it is going to be, but if our recommendation was that no adjustment be made, that should still be the subject of a motion. Does somebody want to make a motion?
I move that we make no adjustment to the commercial objectors on file.
I second it.
Okay. A motion has been made and seconded. The motion is to not adjust Mr. Nosner's assessment for the SID. Any further discussion, or shall I put it to a vote? Hearing none. All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? You're holding your hands up. That made a delay. Was that with your eye, Matt?
That was a delay, I think, of the yay that he seconded.
Okay. All right. So the motion passes. Mr. Nosner, we appreciate your coming to speak with us, and we appreciate all your time tonight, as well as all of the folks who come to speak with the board. We do have a couple of other tasks here, but I don't know whether our guests need to stay with us, that more or less have to do with how we communicate this information to council. Is that right? And I'm looking at Laura.
Yes. Mr. Chair, it's my understanding that we have created a form that I believe Mr. Davidson will execute the form and then deliver it electronically for signature, and then we will then submit it to the city clerk for presentation to council.
Okay. And that will occur after this meeting is adjourned. Is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. The motions have been passed and carried, and the decisions have been made. We just need to have them transcribed and then signed off to.
Okay. So I guess I'll ask, are there any other matters that should or any other matters to come before this board tonight, or have we completed our mission, our work?
Mr. Chair, by my estimate, I believe you have dutifully executed your duties, and there are no other matters to be heard by the board, and it is yours to adjourn should you so choose.
And patiently. Thank you.
Okay.
My lack of patience, I apologize for.
No, thank you so much, Mark, for your work on this. I mean, I think this is definitely, as I said, a very positive thing for the community. And, you know, as a resident of Columbus, I really look forward to kind of seeing how this will evolve. And congratulations on the baby, Betsy. And thank you all, everyone, for hanging in there with us as we kind of really reviewed this and we tried to be thorough. So,
yes. Indeed. Mr. Adair, any comments? I see a thumbs up, but other than that?
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure serving with you, Autumn and Matt, and also thank you to Laura Baker Orish for keeping us legal and counseling us. Also to Mark Lundeen from Development and making sure we knew what we were doing here tonight. And we appreciate your time as well. And to all of the property owners and others who've come to speak with us tonight, thank you again for your time. So a motion to adjourn. I would so move. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.